Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We're here to talk about stuff this week on the show. We are finishing our E3 2021 coverage with Nintendo's E3 show, which happened last Tuesday. We're going to recap that. And then we are going to review the newest game for the PlayStation 5, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart from Insomniac, which we talked about a little bit in spoiler-free first impressions last week, but we have now both finished it. And it's a great fucking game, isn't it, Sean?
Yes, it is an absolute 2 thumbs up. I was about, I think, 2/3 of the way through it last week. But yes, I finished it and have since gotten about halfway through a New Game Plus playthrough. It's really fucking good.
It's very good. It's also longer than I thought it was, because yesterday, we're recording this episode a couple days ahead of when you're hearing it, but I texted Sean and we were planning today's podcast, and I said, hey, have you finished Ratchet and Clank? And he said yes, and I said, okay, cool, I'm going to finish it tonight. Because I totally thought I had like one thing left to do in that game, and I had like 3 planets left to go to. So I had a long marathon session with that game, and I didn't regret it at all. Very, very fun. No amount of time spent with that game is bad time. This morning I rolled out of bed and started playing it again, and just I finished. I got the Rhino, and it's a great game. So we will talk about that later. Sean, what have you been up to? How's Texas treating you?
It's pretty good. Like nothing else has changed. I have found a spot for my gunpla, because I don't have much in the way of furniture. I'm recording this podcast on a very temporary folding table. That eventually I'll go get a desk and like a proper setup. But there is this sort of built-in kind of mini, I guess you'd call it kind of like a mini kitchen area. I mean, it's not really a kitchen, but it's just sort of like a built-in countertop with some like drawers and stuff like that. And there's a showcase thing there that I think is more for like, maybe you'd put like an expensive wine in there or something like that. And I was like, well, I don't drink wine. Even if I did drink wine, I certainly wouldn't have an expensive one. But I do have an RX-78-2 Gundam. So I put all my gunpla in there, and there's a little light up at the top, and you can turn on a light, and the light shines down on them, and it is very premium looking for what are, mostly outside of my master type ones, what are mostly very cheap gunpla figures. So I feel very, very good about that.
Please take a picture of that. I would love to see that.
Yes.
And we can put that on Twitter or something. But that's awesome. Have you been given your government-issued cowboy hat and spurs yet?
No, not yet. I need to go out wrestling. I need to have 30 hours of wrestling on record. I don't know what that is, but I have to do it. Yes, before they give me my Texas cowboy hat and spurs.
How many guns do you own now?
72.
Wow.
That's the legal limit. You have to have, by legal limit, I mean the minimum.
Right.
You have to have at least 72. There is, I will say, obviously, anywhere it's a spectrum. You have people on, all sides of beliefs and stuff like that. But there are a shocking number of gun stores in Texas. Like, it is everywhere. So it's like, again, I don't want to stereotype people too much, but it was one of those things on the drive down where you're like, Colorado is not like the most liberal place in the world, right? It's moved left over the course of my lifetime by a lot, and it is, broadly speaking, it is left in terms of its politics and stuff like that. But you have a lot of the same kind of Midwest to South kind of American culture there. But you don't see like huge billboards advertising both churches and guns to the near volume that you do in Texas. That is a way that you feel like you people, like, there's a certain segment of the population of Texas that is very much living up to that cliche. It is not most people down here, but there are a lot of gun stores and a lot of churches, and they advertise them very heavily.
You can buy guns in churches, right? That's how it works?
I think so. Isn't that like the 8th commandment or something?
Yeah, thou shalt not kill except with the gun.
Yes, and thou shalt get thy gun in thy church by thy priest, who's also a gun seller.
All right. It sounds like we're writing a movie now that has probably been made. Robert Rodriguez is probably working on that right now. Anyway, well, I'm glad to hear you're doing okay. Any stuff to talk about? I have been busy with some different things. I have one fun piece of stuff to talk about. What have you got going on?
I've got a couple of things, I guess. I guess the main thing I did, obviously, was playing Ratchet Clank. I do, again, want to shout out, like I did last week, the current event going on in Genshin Impact is really good. And they've kind of... The way that those events work is that they kind of roll out the content over the course of a few days. So it's like, here's like a little bit of stuff, and then like 2 days later, we'll open up the next segment of content for the event. And so they've finished rolling out, as far as I can tell, all of the new content. And so I've played, I think, basically everything there is in the new event, and it's fantastic. Like, the way the story wraps up is awesome. The story is very much about Clay, the little firebomb girl in the game, and she's really great. And the voice acting is fantastic. Like, all the stuff, as usual for their big events, is all voice acted, and it's phenomenal. So, yeah, I finished that last night. I've been doing a little bit of Ratchet & Clank New Game Plus stuff, but most of my game playing time for the past 2 days has just been me going and exploring the islands and doing that stuff in Genshin Impact, and it is awesome. So if people have not been playing that game and have not been playing that event, it is the best event they have done and the most substantial one they've done since Dragon Spine when they added the mountain.
Okay. I will probably... So it's not going away, right?
Not right away. I have no idea, like, what the plans are for the new area. I assume that they will basically be there forever. But I don't know if all, like, the specific story stuff, I don't know if that will be there forever or not. Because there's definitely some stuff that is a specific seasonal event. It's hard to know if all that other stuff will be there in perpetuity or not.
Yeah, I might have to dive back in and give that a try once more unto the Genshin Impact breach.
Yes.
It scares me a little bit because that game can eat your life. But yes, anything else?
I guess there is one other brief thing that I realized last night, that there was something I wanted to do for the podcast, and I was like, oh wait, but we're recording this podcast like 2 days earlier than we normally do, so I need to do that right now. So Jonathan, I think it is time. It's been a while, but it is time to take a trip down to Sean's Beta Corner.
It's Sean's Beta Corner with the betas in the corner and Sean.
Hello and welcome to Sean's Beta Corner. I'm Sean, and this is my Beta Corner, where we check out the latest and greatest in the hot world of video game betas. This week on the show, fresh from E3, we're here to talk about Stranger from Paradise, Final Fantasy Origins, a video game whose title is nearly impossible to remember, so I had to write it down in my E3 notes so I could see it again, because, man, that use of from instead of, or something like that. It's Stranger from Paradise. He's not who that guy is. He is a stranger to the paradise. But yeah, so this is the Final Fantasy 1, or set in the world of Final Fantasy 1 Neo type game that is made by Team Ninja, and specifically the Neo people from Team Ninja. And it's in connection with Square Enix, and Tetsuya Nomura has some amount of sort of supervision and over, like, direct creative control at the very top, but I don't think he has a lot of, like, day-to-day working on the game stuff that he does. So it's mostly a Team Ninja game with some weird Final Fantasy Tetsuya Nomura bullshit kind of, like, shoved into it. And so this was the game that Square Enix showed in their E3 press conference. It had been highly rumored for the previous few weeks. And then I think nobody quite knew that it was going to take the form that it took. The demo was also unplayable for about a day and a half because it was just a corrupted version file that would not play. So I just kept on checking Twitter repeatedly, be like, can you play that thing now? Is that weird Final Fantasy thing playable? Nope. And it's like, for a shockingly long amount of time, that thing was just not playable. You can now play it. I think it's exclusive to PS5. I don't know why it looks like garbage. It's definitely not. It's not a PS5 exclusive or anything. I think it's coming to basically everything but Switch. But yeah, the demo itself is basically one area of the game, and it ends with a boss fight with Garland, which is a character you might recognize if you've played Final Fantasy 1. And it's also basically the same kind of stuff they showed in the trailer at the Square Enix show. It's the same area. Garland is the boss that they showed at the end of that trailer. And the thing that's interesting about this game is that the combat in it is fucking fantastic. Like, if you liked Neo, this game has a lot of similarities, but is also doing some things that are very different that are really cool. And so the combat is really aggressive and frenetic in a way that's a lot of fun. It's generally in that Neo or sort of Souls-like style. You've got a normal attack on R1, and then you have like a heavy or special attack on R2. And that attack also takes up magic points, so it puts a lot of kind of Final Fantasy-ness around the edges of the system, where you have MP and kind of that kind of stuff, and you have spells if you're playing as the mage class. Where the Neo stuff of it really comes from is the amount of depth and customizability of the combat system. So basically, as you level up your character class, you go up a sort of skill tree and unlock new different moves, and then you basically kind of create whatever your own combo system or like structure looks like in the game. So there are a number of different moves you could make that you do by hitting light attack, heavy attack. And maybe your light attack, heavy attack is an uppercut thing, or maybe it's a spinning attack, or maybe it's like this jumping smash. And so you want to put one of those in light, heavy, and then there's a different attack you do for light, light, heavy, light, heavy, like light, backwards, heavy. And so there's a whole combo structure, and you kind of create whatever your combo flow is, basically. And that's fairly similar to Neo, where Neo would have multiple different moves you could put into the different button combinations, and so there's a lot of flexibility there, and it kind of replicates that. There's a whole parry system, there's dodging, all that kind of stuff. There's a stamina system that's very Neo-esque or very Sekiro-esque also, where enemies have a stamina bar, you have a stamina bar. If you crush your enemy's stamina bar, you basically get a killing move on them, and you can see their stamina bar at all times. So it's something you're very like conscious of and manipulating as you play the game, is trying to both damage them but also reduce their stamina. But the big thing that is sort of like the unique element of the combat in this game that separates it from Neo is that your character, Jack, that is his name, the dude, the dude bro with the t-shirt in the trailer who says chaos about 1 million times in that trailer, he's just a guy named Jack who, as far as I can tell, he is the stranger. He is from some other universe and has ended up in Final Fantasy 1. That's the kind of what Nomura said in an interview, because there's almost no story in the demo, so you can't really get much info from that. But Jack has this ability by which he can both absorb enemy attacks, and then also he can, when you crush their stamina, he sort of turns them into these crystals and they explode and kind of absorbs their essence, and that's how you get MP back. So it has this very Doom 2016-esque flow where your enemies are the main way you replenish magic power, is by crushing their stamina and then destroying them. So you're incentivized to be very aggressive, but then also you have this really powerful counter kind of move that uses up a decent chunk of your stamina. If you basically hold down circle, you do, I think they call it the soul shield, and that will block basically any attack other than a grapple attack that they kind of mark out in the UI, kind of like Sekiro-y. But also there are specific kinds of enemy spells, like say something shoots a fireball at you, that you can absorb, and then that you can use that spell, say 3 times before you use it up, and then you have to absorb another attack. And so that creates, again, this very aggressive feeling combat system where you are, you have this very powerful counter ability. You can use your enemy's abilities against them, and then you're smashing their stamina down to kill them, to take their MP, so that way you can then use more powerful moves on the next enemy. And that flow, when it's working, is really, really fun. And you can just so much feel this is the team that made Neo in Neo 2 are making this game, because the combat system is incredibly, incredibly good. The thing about the demo that is less good is basically everything else. I think, like, graphically, it just... I mean, I should say it feels very early. It kind of reminds me of Neo 1 had a pretty early technical alpha that was pretty different from the end game. I mean, that was something where they had, like, a whole durability system where weapons could break and stuff like that in the technical alpha of Neo 1, that system does not exist in the game in any way, shape, or form. So this feels like them kind of doing something similar where they're putting out a pretty early version of the game to get feedback on it. But part of that is that the graphics are really bad. I mean, it looks to me kind of like less like a PS4 game and like a PS4 port of a PS3 game. Like, it has this mushy quality to the graphics that's very much like the thing that a lot of Japanese games in that like mid 360 PS3 generation had, this just very kind of foggy, hazy look to them. And this kind of has that. I think there's a readability issue with the enemies and the environment because the graphics are poor and the art design is not interesting and everything is just kind of bland in kind of monochrome. It means that enemies don't stand out well from the background and their attacks are harder to read because of that, and that's kind of a problem. I think particularly in the Garland boss fight that is an issue. And then the like whole aesthetic and take on Final Fantasy 1 stuff and the characters I just don't like. Like, you don't get a lot of the story stuff, but what is there and what you see of it is just not compelling to me in any way. I will say you can play with Japanese voices on, and that is definitely what you should do, because at least then Jack is voiced by, I forget his name, but it's the guy who plays Kaiba in Yu-Gi-Oh! And Dainsleif in Genshin Impact. He plays the main character.
Well, now I gotta play this. That's one of my favorites. I love him.
So you get that great voice, but like, and that's, that's a million times better than like dude bro voice you get if you're playing in English. But there's not, so that sort of alleviates a little bit of that problem, but it doesn't then make the sort of narrative direction they're going in any more appealing. It still has this weird sort of Kingdom Hearts-iness to the, like, there's way too much pause between lines of dialogue. There's a stiltedness to everything that is, to me, like the Nomura-ness of it all, where all of his games have this very, like, heavy, weird, stilted style to the dialogue that is alleviated a little bit by getting some of the bad English anime dub quality of the voice acting out, but it doesn't fix it entirely. And so overall playing the demo is a weird experience because it's this thing where I'm left with, this is a great fucking combat system, and some of the ways the combat system uses Final Fantasy elements to it is kind of interesting. But I really wish that everything else was just a different video game, because all that stuff in the demo is not appealing in the slightest. So if you really like those action systems, like, I'll say it put the game on the radar for me for sure, because the combat is fun enough that I would be able to sort of ignore the rest of it if there was a full game, assuming they fixed up some of like the weird technical graphical stuff. That I'm definitely curious and interested in what the game will be like at release. But if you're someone who's curious about the game for the Final Fantasy side of it, and like are they going to do cool stuff with the Final Fantasy 1 thing and all that, I don't think this game is going to appeal to people who are more into that than into the combat.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So I haven't played Neo, so I don't have that experience with it, but I fully expected the combat would be good. Like, Team Ninja knows what they're doing there, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's all, because I've heard similar things from other people as what you're saying, Sean. And there's something about mixing Final Fantasy 1 of all Final Fantasies with Tetsuya Nomura that, like, makes me break out in hives. Like, that's like, if there's one Final Fantasy I don't want Nomura touching, I feel like it's like Final Fantasy 1, because that's so diametrically opposed to like his style of storytelling and like gameplay and all of that stuff. And I like Nomura sometimes. I like Final Fantasy 15 more than I think a lot of people. That's the one I like. So I had to think for a second. Obviously I like his character designs sometimes, although I think the character designs in this game look really boring to me. Like, there's no zippers. Where are all the zippers?
I will say that it's got, like Neo, there's a whole, like, equipment and loot mechanic to it. So, like, that dude is in that, like, weird t-shirt for all of, like, 2 seconds before you pick up, like, a leather jacket or whatever, or, like, a leather, like, good armor. So his character design gets better, at least in, like, his clothes are less shit. It kind of feels like maybe Tetsuya Nomura was like, oh wait, the player character will just change outfits? Well, then I don't need to give a fuck about designing what his clothes look like. Whatever, he's in a t-shirt and some pants.
Fair enough. And I didn't know this thing about, like, Jack is this dude from another dimension. Why do I care about that then? Like, just tell a Final Fantasy 1 story. There's plenty to do there. It's a cool world. This is so weird to me, but whatever. I don't know if I will wind up playing the demo. I think I have a lower tolerance in general for this kind of, like, demo beta. Well, obviously, I'm not the one at the beta corner.
Exactly.
So, you know,
I have a professional responsibility to check out the betas. So.
You have a whole corner of your house devoted to this. Like, that's
exactly.
why we call it that.
It was the first thing I set up when I got here. I took my beta corner. I mean, I just had the movers. I marked out, here is this corner of the house. You're just taking this, putting it on the truck, and then we're just slotting it into the new house. And so that's the first thing we did when we got here, was set up my beta corner.
Well, I'm glad. There's going to be many, many great betas to come, I'm sure.
Yes. I should also say this game, or what this thing, the demo is in no way a beta. This certainly does not feel like a game that is in, like, what you would generally regard a beta type form. But for the spirit of the corner, I still regard it a beta for the beta corner.
Yeah, of course. My only piece of stuff, really... So I have been a little busy getting back to Iowa, getting some stuff set up for the summer and whatnot. But I did this week get a shipment in from CD Japan. I got Kimetsu no Yaiba, the movie, Mugen Train, on Blu-ray from Japan. Along with, I don't know if you've seen the sales numbers for this thing, Sean, 1 million other people. This sold over 1 million copies in 3 days in Japan. That would be an achievement for a movie on physical media in the United States, and we have like 3 times as many people. So, but I am one of those people. I got the special edition Blu-ray. This is not the most expensive one you could have gotten, because UFO Table from their site was selling a version that was this, plus like storyboard cards, and I think there was a light-up thing of Rengoku that you would put on your desk, and like all of that. I did not get that, because that would have required a courier service. And then that gets expensive if you know anything about shipping from Japan. This was just from CD Japan. This runs, I think it's 9,000 yen, which at the current exchange rate was $80 plus shipping. CD Japan got it to me on release day, which is pretty crazy good shipping. Yeah. So thank you, CD Japan. And this is like one of the nicest box sets I've ever gotten for anything. The box is like this very nice cardboard that like is clearly meant to like evoke the like period Taisho element of Kimetsu no Yaiba, and then it is an original illustration by UFO Table on the front and back with Rengoku and Tanjiro, and it is gorgeous. And then you open it up and there's another box inside with another illustration that like is this big fold-out thing for the digipack that is gorgeous. It has the movie on Blu-ray with English subtitles, I should say. If you want the movie now, I'm sure it'll come out on Blu-ray in the States, but if it doesn't, you can just get it from Japan. It's got the subtitles. They're the same subtitles as that were in theaters. It's all good. There is not the dub. If for some reason you care. I don't know why you would, but if you care, it's not on there. And so it's got the movie on Blu-ray. Looks great. Beautiful. It's got a bonus DVD that is not subtitled, but has a bunch of cool features. It's got, like, I think a thing from the premiere where, like, all the actors are on stage talking about the movie. It's got an interview program with several of the actors. Basically, like, the main, like, 5 or 4 or 5 that you have in Kimetsu. It's got some of the promo materials, trailers, all of that stuff. Really fun. The movie has an audio commentary, which I have not, like, listened too much of. One, because it's obviously the audio commentary is not subtitled, and I don't speak that good Japanese. But I turned it on near the end of the movie, and I could understand enough that it was very funny. The movie ends, with Tanjiro, his hand over his heart, saying Rengoku-san over and over again, and it cuts to credits. And everyone on the commentary is quiet for like 30 seconds, and then Hane Natsuki breaks the tension by saying something to the effect of, "Well, that was a little surprising, wasn't it?" And everyone laughs. And then they all get caught up listening to Homura, the song by Lisa. And they all wind up just saying something to the effect of like, they're like, man, she's really talented, and then they all just start going kakui desu, like all of them. It's very funny how they all get caught up watching the movie. And then there is a CD with the full movie soundtrack, which was actually the reason I splurged for this version instead of the basic, was to get that fucking soundtrack because I wanted it so bad, and it's not on any of the like services or anything. But it's here. It's the full CD. They filled that CD up. It's 78 minutes out of the 80 that a CD allows, and it's the full score. And I listened to the whole thing yesterday, and I've probably listened to most of it again. That is one of the best movie scores I have heard in years. And I thought that watching the movie, but like listening to it on its own, whole other level. So yeah, I have not watched the full movie again yet. I actually did just see this in theaters for a third time like 2 weeks ago because I brought my brother to go see it. I think I mentioned that on the podcast. But yeah, this movie is so good. I'm very happy to own this special edition of it because it is incredibly nice and a very nice add to the collection. So I'm very glad I have that, and I do think it's funny that this series continues to just be a runaway fucking freight train in terms of sales and popularity, and it feels like we're at the beginning, not the end of that, so I'm almost terrified to see where it goes from here. But yeah.
Yeah, like, it does make me curious if that will, like, translate over to the CyberConnect 2 game that's coming out presumably this fall.
Yeah.
Like, it's coming out in Japan this fall. I don't know if it'll come out over here. I don't know if
it's coming out in October in Japan, because it says so in the promo materials in here.
Yeah, like, for people who don't know, CyberConnect 2 is making basically an Ultimate Ninja Storm style game for Kimetsu Yaiba, Ultimate Ninja Storm being the Naruto series they did. That was very good. I mean, very good in a, like, if you're a fan of the material and you just want to run around with those characters and do cool things, they're really fun. It's not like a Dragon Ball FighterZ-esque. It is also just, like, a great fighting game. Like, they're just kind of fun party sort of fighting arena games. But I'm really excited for that. And I think that game is going to sell like a stupid number of copies.
Yep.
I feel like it's just that game is also going to blow up from the Kimetsu-ness of it all.
I hope I feel like it's in their interest to do as close to a worldwide release of that as they possibly can, because that game, I mean, this series is so big everywhere, including here. Yeah, it's great. It's kind of funny. This is like an anime property where we're pretty much on the ground floor of it, and so we're going to be here for the first Kimetsu game, which is crazy to consider, because I have not ever played, like, the first Dragon Ball or One Piece game, whatever the hell those were, right? And that's kind of crazy to consider, because assuming there's going to be, like, 7 of those Kimetsu games from CyberConnect 2 at some point, right?
Yes, because, I mean, the game is clearly just based on the anime, so I'm assuming it probably only goes up to Mugen Train, or it might even not go up to Mugen Train.
It does. It's got there's a trailer with Rengoku, and there's a move in the game where Tanjiro does the big fire spin that he does in the movie. So it clearly goes up to something from the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it'll have the, like, enemy character. Like, if they say that, okay, it also has the enemies from the movie, then it would be, okay, then they're doing all the movie stuff also. But, like, whatever it is, it's only covering anime material. It's not going into any of the manga stuff. So, yes, it's definitely going to be, like, 4 or 5 CyberConnect 2 Kimetsu Yaiba games, which I'm stoked for. Give it all to me.
I have gotten back into reading the manga, and I'm in the Entertainment District arc. And all I can say about that is, as I was reading that, especially like the setup for it, I was shaking with excitement at the prospect of the voice actors doing this material in the next season. Because I don't want to spoil it, but there is some stuff that all 3 of our mains, like the 3 leads, holy crap, I am excited for particularly Inosuke, I think. I really want to hear how he's going to do some of this.
Yes, no, that is definitely the thing of reading the manga, is that it's amazing in its own right, and then there's this whole other joy of it, of just, like, being able to imagine, how would the voice actor say this line, or, like, what are they going to do with this scene, and it must be, like, weird being one of those actors, and, like, because, obviously they have all read the manga all the way through, probably multiple times at this point, and so, like, there's some of that material that you're like, man, this is, like, going to be such a great scene. And for them, they're like, I've got to make sure I do this really well in, like, 4 or 5 years, with, like, how much longer it's going to take for the anime to be able to cover all of that material. Like, that has got to be a weird feeling.
Yeah, but it's a cool journey to be on. And something that's probably going to be a mainstay of this podcast going forward. So if you don't like Kimetsu, you can fuck right off.
Or you can go watch it again, because it's good. If you didn't like it the first time, you maybe just missed it.
I'm sorry I was so aggressive earlier, but that's how I feel sometimes. I have to. I spent a lot of money on this fucking thing.
Yes.
No, it's great. I do not regret it. All right, Sean, you want to do some news?
What's going on in the news, Jonathan?
So we had the rest of E3. I watched the Nintendo show and I took notes, and I'm going to guide us through that. But Sean, you're our E3 guru. Is there anything else from E3 2021 that we have not covered that we should cover before we get into Nintendo?
No, not really. There were a couple of other things. I should say like everyone else, like Take-Two had a thing, Capcom had a thing, Namco Bandai kind of had a thing. But like they all of them basically said, hey, there's not going to be anything major here. They're like, it was mostly updates to like existing projects. I know Gearbox had a thing, and I think the only thing they did was like show shit from the Borderlands movie, but not even like a trailer. And
wait, there's a Borderlands movie?
There is a Borderlands movie. Kevin Hart plays one of the main characters. Which is hilarious. He plays the character Roland. For anyone who's played Borderlands 1, you will know how utterly absurd it is that Kevin Hart is playing Roland. Because Roland is like the 6'5" giant soldier beefy muscle man. I have no idea what the fuck that movie is going to be. But
bad.
Yeah.
I know it's going to be bad.
Yes, it's going to be bad. I didn't watch any of the Gearbox thing. I only saw afterwards people being like, oh, fuck, that was just weird shit from the movie and, Randy Pitchford's, weird ego trip around Borderlands. It's great, I'm glad I didn't watch that. And all the other things were, Capcom talked a little bit more about, Monster Hunter Stories or whatever at their event. Mostly stuff that was already announced projects. So we're not going to go over what they showed. It's just kind of... Overall, I'll say, maybe getting a little ahead of it, but I think my take is that, E3 didn't need to happen. Most companies that showed up didn't need to do this. Most of them didn't have enough stuff to show. The only two companies that had anything worthwhile to show was really Microsoft and Nintendo. It's just, do you really need to have an online E3 if there's only two companies that have anything meaningful to show up and have trailers and talk about? Because everybody else, it's just you could have just put this trailer up whenever. You could have just done an event for this game whenever. I really don't think the E3 2021 online experiment was useful for most people that participated in it.
Yeah, this is one of the poorer E3s we've covered. Maybe the poorest.
This is easily the poorest. And, there's obvious reasons for that. Obviously the pandemic happened and all of that. This has to be all online. But regardless, that doesn't mean that then you should have done it anyways. The ESA is going to do it because they need to make their money. But for the companies involved, I wonder if they look at this and just be like, do we really need to do this? Sony didn't show up at all. EA did a Battlefield trailer a week beforehand, and they didn't do anything else connected to this. Activision didn't show anything at all. I guess Diablo 2 Remastered had a trailer at one of the shows. That's the most Activision Blizzard thing there was. So it just kind of feels like most of the other companies are either all the way out or backing away completely. And for the people that remain, it's just for Nintendo, they're just we might as well do our Nintendo Direct around this time anyways.
Right, that's part of it is that okay, Nintendo, before we even get into it, Nintendo won E3. They by far had the best show. They by far had the most press out of it. It's objective this time, right?
Yeah, there's this game from Microsoft. No. Nintendo had the best stuff, had the best show, easy. It's just no contest.
But Nintendo could have done this anytime. They were doing E3 a fucking charity by programming it here. And this has been true for a long time. Nintendo does not need E3. Nintendo has their direct thing. Frequently, their E3 show isn't their best in a given year, even, you know? So, that's what's so weird about this, is, Nintendo is bringing the best stuff, but, they don't need E3. Microsoft, I think, kind of does need E3, because it's what gives them, they are the ones who do, the biggest show every year, and, they get that platform. But everyone else is dropping out. Ubisoft's show has gotten worse and worse over time, and then everyone else is gone. So, I really don't know how this... I know we say this every year, but it's what is E3 in the future? And I don't really know after this year. Yeah,
because I think it's also, interesting to point out, one of the reasons why I think Microsoft leans so hard into E3 is because, they, and specifically Phil Spencer, are members of the ESA, which is the organization that puts on E3.
Right.
So, there's a direct benefit from them in multiple different senses from participating in E3. But yeah, I think just because I also don't know how much of what this E3 was really is because of the pandemic. Obviously, some of it is that, like, that affected game development tremendously, but it's also been a trend for the past several years that E3 has become, like, smaller and smaller. And the ESA has struggled to find a way to kind of recontextualize the event as a slightly more fan-centered thing when it was in person, to make up for that, and they seem to have floundered in that attempt. And then also just the way that game development has trended, where for big AAA games, game development takes a lot longer. And also those games, because they're more expensive and they take longer to make, they end up being service games where you have something like Ubisoft Show, where Ubisoft talks about basically existing products for almost the entire show, and that's kind of it, or like modifications to existing products, like the Rainbow Six Siege thing. And it's like, that doesn't make for a good E3, because the people who are into Rainbow Six Siege might be way into that, but anyone who's not into it, you're not going to be enticed to get into this like 6-year-old video game by a trailer that's about the community management of Rainbow Six Siege or fucking whatever, right? So those service games don't make for interesting E3 press conferences, and don't need E3 press conferences because they have enough gravity to attract players on their own. So it definitely, like, I think the combination of the pandemic, E3's like dwindling relevance regardless, and the shifts in game production and style mean that like E3 to me is like very much an event on life support after this year.
Yeah, because like Sony pulling out of E3 wasn't just Sony flexing. I think it's because it didn't really make sense anymore. Because the last couple years Sony was there, I really liked Sony shows, and they would do these really focused, they're going to show a couple of games. They had that year where they had the big orchestra. Their last year at E3 was when they showed off Last of Us 2 and Spider-Man, and they had the like different environments they went to. And those were really good because they were these big, meaty demos of good-looking games. The problem is, like, Sony gives its developers, this isn't a problem, this is a good thing, they give their developers the time and space to work on their games, but that means that the stars don't align every June to have enough of those to do a show for, right? And so, well, what are you going to... So you could go the Microsoft route and just vomit trailers for 90 minutes, but, like, I think if Sony was going to do it at the level of quality they wanted, they weren't going to be able to do this, right? And so that's, I think, the main reason why they don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Nintendo has their direct thing that they have on lock, and they can throw one of those out every June, no problem. But like, yeah, it's, you know, Microsoft's going to do it whether they have something to show or not, and you can always put 90 minutes of trailers togetker. Just doesn't mean it's going to be a good show.
yeah, Microsoft has enough, you know, deals with enough third-party publishers that they could show fucking 5 hours of trailers. They could never end. Like, there are lots of video games coming out, especially if you include indies.
Right.
But it doesn't make for an interesting E3.
So let's transition to Nintendo, which, like, didn't just have the best stuff. It also just was like, and I feel this pretty much every year, but it was extra apparent this year of, like, Nintendo's thing where they do a 40-minute show, where it is quick and it is produced, and it's very well produced, and it's snappy, literally, because they snap their fingers a bunch because of the Switch gimmick, and like usually there's a couple of meaty things in there. Like, it is just such a breath of fresh air. There could have been nothing I cared about, and it still would have been better than Xbox, because just 40 minutes better than 90. Thank you.
Yes, I agree that, like, they are, I mean, especially at this point, they've done so many of these that, like, it's a very well-oiled machine and kind of format. And so it's like, even if there's a long stretch where there's not a game that you're personally interested in, it's just so well produced and well paced that you don't care. Like, you're entertained to see what they have on offer and go like, oh yeah, like, hey, someone else might be into fucking Mario Party or whatever, even if I don't really care about this game. And then quickly it's on to the next thing, and then you get like a little bit more of a deep dive into a couple things, and then you know that eventually when you get closer to release, like, there will be a Metroid specific Nintendo Direct that will go more in depth in those games, or you can wait for the Treehouse live stream for some of that stuff to get a bigger deep dive. So it's just a really well structured thing, which has always been true. It's just accentuated by the fact that nobody else had anything at this E3.
And I think this year also really showed the wisdom of the Treehouse thing they do, because what it allows them to do is they have these really focused shows, and then there's like 3 or 4 hours of live streams where you might tune in if you want to watch the Metroid part, you might tune out, all of it will be archived, and they might do some really surprising stuff, which they do every year somewhere in the treehouse. There's something fun and surprising. So, I really like that too, because I like, and you get to hear from the devs, and like, it's what E3 is at its best, but like, especially in the online format, has just disappeared. But Nintendo's been doing it online for years, so they know what they're doing. Yep. All right, so this E3 show was hosted by Shinya Takahashi and Yoshiaki Koizumi. They remind us the Switch is now in its 5th year because we're all old and time is cruel. They will be focusing on a selection of games releasing this year, which was true. There were really only 2 games they highlighted that aren't for this year, and one of those was Mario & Rabbids, which is Ubisoft. So, there you go. First up was a dark fantasy video that started with a dead Ganondorf being thrown into a volcano by a muscled man who turned out to be Kazuya from Tekken, the next Smash fighter. He then threw a dead Captain Falcon into the volcano, then a bunch of corpses. The best one, I think, being Min Min from ARMS, whose arm got stuck on the edge of the cliff and he had to kick the arm off. And then finally he dropped Kirby, who just floated back up and away. Very cute. And Sakurai came and talked about how Sakurai, who is slowly losing his mind in that room where he streams from every time, because this time he was just like, he's like, this feels like Tekken. No, it's Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. We'll have more info June 28th. We haven't filmed this yet. We'll be doing that next. It's so funny. But yeah, Kazuya from Tekken is coming to Smash. Makes total sense. And that was a great fucking video, watching him just murder different Smash characters. I like this theme, and I again worry Sakurai. I hope he's okay, because some of these Smash reveals have gotten pretty dark. Luigi died. Mario died. Now they're all dead. It's great.
Yeah, like the original script for the trailer, because Sakurai, as he said, I think in the last one, like he writes like the script basically for these trailers. In the original version, the last person to get thrown into the volcano was Sakurai himself, and then the trailer house said, Sakurai-san, we can't do that. This is too dark. Can we do a Kirby joke? And he's like, fine, yes, we can do a Kirby joke.
Yes, but I do not have much experience with Tekken, but like it makes sense. They've got the characters from Street Fighter. They've got King of Fighters. What's his name?
Terry.
They got Terry. This makes total sense, and that is one of my favorite Smash reveal trailers. The Ganondorf with his eyes rolled back, dead, being carried by Kazuya into the volcano. Metal as fuck. Very Tekken. Very good.
Yes, the one thing, I'm not like super into Tekken, but I have dabbled in the Tekken. Like, I understand the reference of like Tekken always has this thing where Heihachi throws Kazuya into the volcano, Kazuya being Heihachi's son, and then Kazuya climbs out, and then he fights Heihachi to get revenge, and then Kazuya throws Heihachi into the volcano. So the whole ridiculous thing is sort of like a running joke almost now in the fandom about the volcano thing. The one thing I want to take up against this is that it should be Heihachi, because he's way cooler. Heihachi is the guy who's like bald, and he has the 2 huge like spikes of hair on either side of his head, and you see him in the trailer, but I think he's just in the background of a stage. But Heihachi is the cool Tekken man. I like Heihachi. Whenever I played a Tekken, he was the character I played as. And Kazuya is just like a boring dude. Heihachi is like the leader of whatever his like massive mega corporation Zaibatsu. He's the man who started throwing motherfuckers into volcanoes back in the 90s when it was cool. So this is my official appeal. Make it Heihachi. Kazuya's a lame-o.
It would have been cool if like they did that whole trailer, Kirby's floating away, and then Heihachi sneaks up and throws Kazuya in and says, no, just kidding, Heihachi's the fighter.
Then I would have like flipped my table and been like, yeah, motherfuckers, I'm gonna go buy a Switch right now.
Awesome. All right, Takahashi came back to introduce our first batch of headlines. Life is Strange Remastered and Life is Strange True Colors are both coming to Switch, but not Life is Strange 2, which I did check, not on Switch. Sean, I think you were onto something last week. What happened to Life is Strange 2? It didn't happen now?
It's that thing of where it didn't catch on with the mainstream, even though, again, like people... I have not played Life is Strange 2, but I know multiple like game journalists talk about this a lot, where they're like, this game was fucking awesome and nobody played it. And, hey, I didn't play it. I mean, I don't think it's ever been on PS Plus, which is why I played the first game. So if you give it to me for free, then I'll probably check it out. But yeah, I think just because it didn't sell well, they're just kind of ignoring it, and it's like, but that's why you should be putting it out on more systems, is that if the game is really good, there's a good chance that it can catch more attention if it just like it gets more momentum. I think it got fucked because everything else is moving away from the episodic structure. Like, I don't even think True Colors is episodic.
No, True Colors is just a single release.
Yeah, because I think everyone started realizing this is just a bad production model for video games. It's a bad business model. Like, people don't buy the episodic stuff. They wait and buy the whole collections when they come out. And Life is Strange 2 was still episodic, and it was kind of one of the last games that was trying that structure out. And I think that like kind of killed all the momentum it might have had. And if you put it on the Switch, which is a system where people buy 1,000 billion video games, it might catch a bigger audience. So I think it's a mistake for them not to put it out there.
Yeah. Another Square Enix thing, Guardians of the Galaxy, the Eidos game is coming to Switch. I don't remember if they said that at Square, but that was a surprise to me that this game is, and this is natively on Switch. This is not a cloud port. That surprised me quite a bit.
Yeah, they had the logo, and I took note of that. But it was definitely, it's one thing to have a logo and then to like have a trailer at the Nintendo thing and be like, oh wait, right, this game is coming to the Switch. That's crazy. I'm curious to see what the differences are between the different versions of that game.
They announced Worms Rumble, a real-time arena-based shooter based on Worms with exclusive Patchwork Bear outfit.
That game is already out on PlayStation and Xbox. It's a port of Worms Rumble. The only thing I've heard about this game is I think the Worms people the fans of Worms aren't into this Worms, which I feel like it's like every third Worms or so, the Worms people are like, hey, this is the good one. But most Worms people, I think, don't like most Worms games. But I don't play Worms games, so I don't know.
I'm just fascinated by saying Worms people so many times. It sounds like you're insulting them. I don't think you are.
No,
they like
they're
Worms.
Just people into the video game. Hey, I played whatever Worms game was on. I think it was the PS2. That was like a friend of mine back in like middle school was way into that, and we would play like 3-person or 4-person Worms at his house. And that was cool. But Worms to me is like a game very much stuck in an older era of video games that I don't think there are new people coming to the Worms franchise. I think there are people who have liked Worms for a long time. Nobody else makes games that are quite like that. As this kind of goofy, physicsy 2D turn-based thing with a bunch of gags in it. But yeah, it's like a weird franchise to still be kind of like crawling along, one might say, this many years later.
They showed off an RPG called Astria Ascending that is fully hand-painted. Looks very pretty. That's coming September 30th. They showed 2 Point Campus, a wholesome management sim where you build and run your own university, which is the first time I've ever wanted to play a sim because I'm going to run this university right, goddammit.
Sure.
No, I'm kidding.
I'm going to run it right by making the most money, right? You just got to get all that profit. That's what a campus and a university is there for.
First thing I do, cut my own department. No more film studies.
Exactly. It's ridiculous. Who needs this?
Yeah. All right. A beloved series rolls into its 20th anniversary this year. That was Monkey Ball.
Yay.
Yep, which is Monkey Ball trailer. It was Super Monkey Ball Remastered Collection, Banana Mania, coming October 5th. So it'll be the first 3 games in that series, it seems like.
Yeah, that was a trailer where it was very hard to suss out exactly what the game was because it was like buried under so much like all the Super Monkey Ball stuff. You're like, is this a new game? Is this a remaster? Is this even... Because I don't even know if this is a new remaster because that game has been remastered a couple of times. But whatever it is, the first 3 Monkey Balls will be on the Nintendo Switch.
Yes. No, this is new, and they were mixing footage of like the original like 4x3 PS1, 2 era stuff with like the new remastered stuff. It does look more extensive than like you might have expected. But yeah, it looked cool. Then it's a blast from parties past, and you're invited with Mario Party Superstars, a collection of boards and minigames from the N64. It'll have 5 boards from the N64 games and 100 minigames from across those 3 games, with online play supported for everything, even including random matchmaking to go play a Mario Party online, which is pretty cool.
Who would ever do that? Who would ever play random person Mario Party? Like, it should be in the game. Every game should have online multiplayer if it's a multiplayer game, and it should have matchmaking. Like, it's just a standard feature that every multiplayer should have. But there are some games where the thought of it is, like, gut-wrenchingly horrifying to me to play Mario Party online with a person I don't know. And I don't know if it would be worse because it's Switch, so I don't even know if there is voice chat. But I don't know if it would be worse to voice chat and play Mario Party with a person you don't know online, or if it would be even worse to play Mario Party with someone you don't know online and there's no communication with them at all. It's just some random human being somewhere out there in the world playing Mario Party with you, and you don't know who the fuck they could be or what they're planning or what they're plotting for you with Mario Party. It's crazy.
Yes. So, it looks really good, though, I have to say. I am a big fan of Mario Party. This one is my jam. It's the N64 era, which those three are the best of all the original Mario Parties. And I wish it had more boards. Having just 5 at launch is a little weird, although that's one more than the most recent game had, Super Mario Party, which had 4 and never got updated until this year when they finally did something beyond version 1.0 where they added online. But the minigames look awesome. It was a bunch of minigames that I love and remember very well, and they look very nice. It's all completely remade. And yeah, I like Mario Party. I'm excited for this one. This was a really nice little announcement because that's a series that does not get a lot of love these days, but is, I think, worth the effort for something like this. So I was really glad to see that.
The one thing with this is, why isn't this just DLC for Super Mario Party? Like, why is this a different game? Like, it feels...
Yeah. Well... Because I think they're fairly different. I mean, that's a good question, but like for one, Super Mario Party is like 4 years old now. You know, that
but
was
they just updated it with online.
That's true. That's true. I don't know. My understanding is I think it's because mechanically they're a little different. Super Mario Party does like its board stuff is a little different. I would assume this is more close to the classic N64 stuff.
It's just because I had assumed that this was going to be those boards in the Super Mario Party style.
It didn't really look like that to me. Yeah, it kind of looked like, I mean, like graphically, yes, but it seemed a little different from that to me.
Yeah, because I guess it just feels weird to me that like Mario Party is a game that is so built for the modern like service model style video game distribution.
Absolutely, yeah.
That it's really, you know, I mean, the fact that they didn't have multiplayer in Super Mario Party until like 3 years or something after that game came out is madness. But like it feels like them adding in online multiplayer is like maybe them realizing, oh wait, like now like this is the time for Mario Party. This is like the best time for Mario Party since like the N64 when before online and everything was just you played it in person. So it was normal to just have an expectation of a multiplayer focused game that you could only play with other people in the same room because that was the ways you played all multiplayer games on consoles. But like in the modern online era of video games, Mario Party has always felt very kind of like archaic or anachronistic in a weird way. And it's like I think there's like an opportunity here for Nintendo to make like a really cool Super Mario Party that is an ongoing thing that you update with new maps and new minigames and new characters and stuff like that, instead of doing like here's like a game that has 4 or 5 maps in it and then just doing a new one every 3 years or so. It just feels like a weird fit.
Well, I think this could be that, because here's my theory on it, Sean. I think everyone who played Super Mario Party agreed that it was very good, best Mario Party probably since the N64, really good like revival of the series, but it felt like a very like thin foundation where like the foundation was very good, but then there wasn't a lot on top. It only had the 4 maps. It had a good number of minigames, but like it needed a few more modes. It needed online desperately, all of this stuff. And at launch, I think everyone assumed it was going to get that. And then years went by with radio silence. Like literally, that game, like I have the cartridge of that, and it just runs the cartridge code. There was no patch at all. It was 1.0 until this year. No patches whatsoever, in the way that sometimes Nintendo games are, but usually like single-player games, right? And so they did this online update this year, but that's probably like too little too late to get that game moving again. I think this is maybe an attempt to relaunch and see if they can make Mario Party a bigger thing in the online era, because this one is like more of what we were looking for from the start, and hopefully because it's based on N64 stuff, if you wanted to add boards, that's not that hard. You have them made. You have to remake them in modern graphics, but that's a lot easier than starting from scratch, right? So my opinion is I don't know why this isn't just like Mario Party Ultimate and doesn't have like all the maps and all the minigames from the first 3 games, like Super Smash Bros. Kind of thing, but whatever. I am still looking forward to this. So then we had the best part of the show, because Takahashi came back. He reminded us they're still working on Metroid Prime 4, not ready to show it yet. I'm very excited to see when that game eventually comes out.
On the Switch 2.
Yes, probably. So instead, they're showing a different new entry, and my jaw dropped because then a trailer started with the words on screen, Metroid 5. And if you don't know why this is a big deal, the way the Metroid series goes, you have original Metroid on NES, you had Metroid 2 Return of Samus on Game Boy. Both of those have been remade as Zero Mission and Samus Returns, respectively. Then there's Super Metroid, and I think a lot of people don't remember. Super Metroid, when you start it up, the cutscene at the beginning starts and says Metroid 3. And that's how it starts, because it's trying to tell you, like, hey, this is the third Metroid. And Metroid Fusion on the GBA, when that came out, did the same thing and called itself Metroid 4 at the beginning. And if you follow the Metroid lore, Metroid Fusion has been the end of the timeline since it came out 19 years ago, because the Metroid Prime games happened between Metroid and Metroid 2. The whole idea is Metroid 2 is what happens after all of the Prime shit, where they're finally fed up enough with the Metroids that they're like, Samus, go do a genocide. And Samus goes and does a genocide. And then 2, 3, 4 all lead into each other very cleanly. And so we've been waiting on Metroid 5 for a long time. It's been planned at different points, but never came out. So the whole video starts, and it's very clear this is graphically, mechanically a sequel to Metroid Samus Returns, which was the 3DS game from 2017 that remade Metroid 2. Fucking amazing game. It was like my number 4 of that year or something. Great, great game. And that was made by the Spanish developer Mercury Steam, and they are doing this again. And in this trailer, we see Samus fighting a robot. She's in sort of an enhanced version of the Fusion suit from Metroid Fusion. It's got more white on it, but it's clearly built off of that. Then there's a bunch of side-scrolling 3D gameplay. It's got a lot of the mechanics from Samus Returns, including like the free aiming and the like melee stuff. And then they show off the title, Metroid Dread, which is a title that they were working on 15 years ago. That like you can go find like magazine articles about this, because the main producer of Metroid, this was his idea for it back in like 2005 for a DS game that never got made, was Metroid Dread. They never really had the power or the developer to do it. He explained in some of the Treehouse stuff afterwards that it was when they met Mercury Steam and did Samus Returns that he felt like, okay, we have the team that can do this, and so they're making Metroid Dread. And on top of all of that, Sean, it's coming out on my literal fucking birthday, October 8th. Thank you, Nintendo.
They made it for you, Jonathan.
It kind of feels like it. Like, if there was one thing I wanted them to show, it was this. And this is so cool. Because, like, I'm excited for Metroid Prime 4 theoretically, but, like, Metroid Prime 1, 2, 3 are such a special thing. Their story is very closed-ended. Like, the Metroid Prime is defeated in Metroid Prime 3. I'm not sure what a Metroid Prime 4 is. I'm not sure where it would go in the canon. But like Metroid 5 and doing a new side-scrolling game, which we haven't had in forever. Holy crap, that's exciting. Done by Mercury Steam, who just hit it out of the fucking park with Samus Returns. This looks so good. There's new amiibo figures they showed off for Samus and the big robot Emmy. I have not been able to secure a pre-order of those amiibo. They look very cool. I have my Samus Returns amiibo on the table right here. I've had them since that game came out. But yeah, it's Metroid 5. It's Metroid Dread. It looks great. It's going to be a Game of the Year contender probably, and it's coming on my fucking birthday. They could not have tailored this more for me if they tried.
Congratulations.
Thank you. What do you think about Metroid?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like a Metroid. I'm not the Metroid man on the podcast. That's you. But yeah, it was definitely that, like, when it just says Metroid 5 on the screen, you're like, oh shit, like, oh yes. Fuck, yeah. And then because I do have like vague memories of the Metroid Dread thing, like making the rounds in that like early DS era, and stuff like that. So yeah, I think this is like a sick announcement. It was like one of the. I mean, I think it was like the surprise of the show. I mean, partially because anything else that would be a surprise had gotten leaked. So there were a lot of other surprise, like, new video game announcements this year. But yeah, this was definitely like the biggest one.
This has been rumored for a while. Like, there were reports that Mercury Steam was doing a new Metroid, but we weren't sure if it was a remake of Fusion or if it was a new Metroid 5. Mm-hmm. And it's a new Metroid 5, which is great. So I will be playing Metroids 1 through 4, probably with Zero Mission and Samus Returns, to prepare for this, and I'm excited. Replay those, I've played them. All right, more headlines, Sean. Just Dance 2022. Holy crap, that's coming to Switch? What a surprise.
Is it still coming to Wii? I hope it is. Like, Just Dance
they
comes out on
stopped that.
everything.
I think Just Dance 2020 was the last one on Wii, but who the hell knows? Cruisin' Blast. This one actually looked pretty cool. This is like an arcade racer that looked very fun. That's coming to Switch. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot is being ported to Switch. That's coming September 24th. It'll have all the DLC.
Well, it'll have... Here's like a weird thing with that. So it'll have the DLC that is the first two DLC things, but around that time, there's actually a Trunks, like Future Trunks DLC that is coming out that is not going to be in this package. Which is why, like, the title of it was weird, because I think that's why it's not called, like, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot Complete Edition or something. It's like Dragon Ball Z Kakarot plus the pack.
It's called Plus a New Power Awakens.
Yes, so it's those two pieces of DLC, but it's not going to be the new Trunks DLC. I just like think...
Interesting,
yeah,
okay.
Just so people know, if you're interested in buying that game, which Dragon Ball Z Kakarot is awesome, and I'm sure it'll be cool on the Switch, just know that if you're assuming this will have all the DLC, it's not going to have the new thing that's, I think, might actually be out before that version of the game comes out on September 24th.
Okay. They reminded us about Mario Golf Super Rush. That's coming June 25th. I am definitely planning on picking this up. This looks like a lot of fun, and Mario Golf is my favorite of the Mario sports games. Monster Hunter Stories 2, they reminded us about. There is a free demo coming on June 25th, and it'll have save data carryover before the game launches July 9th. And then, boy, the hits kept coming. New game from, quote, the head of a certain company, and it's Wario with a brand new game from his company. Wario narrating for us. Love hearing Charles Martinet just talk actual English as Wario. It's very funny. He showed off some micro games. They look fun. And there's also co-op for the first time in this, which is why it is called WarioWare Get It Together. It is coming September 10th. It looks great. It looks like prime WarioWare stuff. There's even, they showed in the Treehouse, there's a bunch of micro games that parody like other Nintendo games, which they've always done, but now they're parodying like new Nintendo Switch games. So there's like micro games parodying the like T minigame in Fire Emblem Three Houses. It looks very funny. So, you know, this was a good Nintendo Direct for some of Nintendo's neglected franchises. So, definitely.
Yeah, that's like, overall, this is definitely like the Nintendo Direct that feels like it's for Nintendo heads, right? Like, it's for like people who are like deep in the Nintendo camp. Like, it's not, this wasn't like, here's like a brand new Mario game. You got a trailer for Zelda stuff, but it's not like, here's like the new Zelda is here. It's not like one of those big, like mammoth kind of games, but there's a lot of those more obscure or kind of esoteric Nintendo games that people are way into.
Yep. Koizumi came back, talked a little about WarioWare, and then we took a look at Shin Megami Tensei V, the game that was announced alongside the Switch. I went back and looked it up, and this was, when the Switch was announced, this was one of the games shown off with it. We've been waiting for it ever since. We got our biggest look at it so far here, and then they did do a Treehouse segment on it if you wanted to see more about it. It's a high school student, surprise, surprise, gets pulled into a different dimension where it is a alternate Tokyo, like a post-apocalyptic Tokyo with all your angels and demons. Looked very cool. Kind of reminded me of some of the stuff in like, I mean, totally different style, obviously, but like 13 Sentinels, and it's like post-apocalyptic stuff. The character fuses with a mysterious figure to gain the power to fight demons. They showed off gameplay through this big sprawling wasteland, showed off some battle, looked very good. There's some new mechanics in there, and then there is also demon negotiation, obviously. They showed off that, and demon fusion, all of that. And finally, this game has a date. It is November 12th worldwide. And I have not played one of the mainline Shin Megami Tensei games. I have been meaning to pick up that remaster of 3 they just put out. But this looks great, and I will probably play it. And it's a Switch exclusive, so this is a big Switch game. Yeah,
it's one that we can like cross off the list of this. There's this Bayonetta 3 and Metroid Prime 4 that are the like, these games were announced either at or very close to around the launch of, or like the announcement of the system of the Switch, and have just been MIA for the entire time. Finally, Shin Megami Tensei V is coming out. I did find it very funny how like much in detail they went into in the trailer into mechanics that are just mechanics that have been in all of these games. And it's like, and you can even negotiate with the demons. I'm like, you've been able to do that since like 1990 or whenever Shin Megami Tensei 1 came out. Like, it's like, they like none of the stuff they talked about in terms of mechanical stuff is anything that's new to the franchise. And I thought it was just kind of funny that they're like, just going into that level. It would be like if you did a trailer for a new Call of Duty game and it was, and you can pull down the left trigger to aim down the sights, and then pull down the right trigger to shoot down your enemies. If you run out of ammo, make sure to press the square button to reload. Like, that's like the level of like basicness the mechanics they were talking about were for Shin Megami Tensei.
It is, but remember that like they're pitching this to the Switch audience, which is this giant audience of new players who have never touched one of these.
Yes, I understand why, but it is very funny, especially because then they do the exact same thing for the very next game that they announced, of going in to weird depth over mechanics that have always been a part of this franchise.
Yes. Because the next one they announced was Danganronpa. For its 10th anniversary, is doing Danganronpa Decadence, which is a collection of 4 games. The main 3, 1, 2, 3, plus the board game from 3 has been expanded into its own game. The collection is a physical exclusive, and then all 4 will be separate on the eShop. So if you want to play them all, probably better deal to get the cart. But yeah, I have never played one of these, and I've always wanted to, and I've never found the time. So maybe this will be when I finally fucking do it, because people swear by these games.
Yeah, I played Danganronpa 1 on the Vita a while ago. I mean, that would have been like fucking like 6 or 7 years ago.
The game is 10 years old, so...
Yes, yeah. I mean, because I played that like off and on when we were in the like... the condo when we were in college as a like Jonathan's using the TV, I needed something to play on the Vita, and I like just played through Danganronpa 1 and I liked it. Like, I'm not like crazy into it, but it was one of those things where coming right off the Shin Megami Tensei, like he went into like such detail explaining the mechanics of Danganronpa as if it's not a 10-year-old video game. Again, like, it's obscure, so I get why most people don't know what it is, but it's like, if you have played one of those games, you're like, well, yeah, it's or as that man said, it's like Danganronpa, and I'm like, fuck, is it so hard to just do the, like, long O in Rompa? Can we never have any American person say Danganronpa right on one of these fucking trailers?
Yeah. But that looked good. The next announcement was fucking bizarre, because this was Fatal Frame Maiden of the Black Water, which they kind of showed off as if it was a new game, and it's not. It's the Fatal Frame game that was made for Wii U that apparently people didn't like. But that is being ported to Switch. It's not the Fatal Frame anyone wanted, but it's there, and it's not a new one. There you go. What is this series called internationally? Because it's only called Fatal Frame in the U.S.
I don't remember. Like, one thing I do know else that's like weird about this one is that because at some point, I think it's after 3 or 4, because Fatal Frame is a pretty old franchise. The Fatal Frame 1 was on PS2. At some point, Nintendo started co-publishing and developing these games, including this one, or at least they published this one because it was exclusive to Wii U. But this port of Maiden of Black Water is coming out on basically everything. So it's not just coming out on Switch. Which means that apparently Nintendo is basically sort of like stepping away from their like whatever amount of like authority or ownership or control they had over the franchise. But yes, this was a game that originally came out in 2014. It's getting ported. It's getting ported to everything. And like from what I know, this is like one of the Fatal Frames that people don't like that much.
Yeah. So anyway, then they showed off some quick hits. Doom Eternal is getting the DLC on Switch. It's getting the Ancient Gods Part 1 launched the day of the Direct, and then Part 2 later on. That's already out everywhere else, but they had not done the DLC for Switch yet. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, that collection is coming to Switch on June 25th. I love this game. It's one of the best games from the last year. It's phenomenal. I will say that Switch port looked bad. I don't know how it played. Visually, like, it looked like quite a cut down. Like, it, compared to, like, I've played that game on PC and I've seen it played on, like, PS4 and stuff. This looks like it was PS1 visuals again, somehow. And I know Switch ports sometimes look potato. Doom Eternal is one of those. But it did kind of shock me for a second. We'll have to see. I hope that game is running at 60 FPS, and maybe that's why there's so many cutdowns. Yeah. That would not be a good game to play at 30.
Yeah, if they're compromising on the frame rate, then that's horseshit. But assuming that the game runs at like a solid 60 frames per second, that is a smart game to port. Like, I think that will sell very well to a Switch audience, yes. Assuming again that it like doesn't run poorly, which I don't think it will. Like, I have to imagine the people handling that port understand that is a game that you need to have run at 60 frames per second for at least for like a modern audience. Yeah,
absolutely. Then they showed off something called Strange Brigade, but I don't remember anything else about it because all I wrote was the word Strange Brigade.
Well, I wrote a little bit more. This is a rare instance where mine intended it to more details than you. Mine says a third-person co-op shooter where you fight Egypt shit, launching later today. That's what I wrote. I have a vague memory of this, of like soldiers shooting like an Anubis man. That's what that one was.
Then they talked about Mario and Rabbids Sparks of Hope. It was just a cut down of the Ubisoft trailer. Nothing new, no date other than it's coming 2022, but that game's coming and it's going to be awesome. Then, oh my god, this is probably my second favorite announcement of the day. The Orange Star Nation is under attack. The original Advance Wars is returning, reimagined and rebuilt from the ground up. Thrilling stories, memorable characters, and vibrant gameplay are in store, they said. But it is Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp. It's coming December 3rd. It is a remake collection of Advance Wars 1 and 2. Complete remake. It's like 3D visuals that sort of like look almost like toy-esque. It's very nice, very in keeping with like the original GBA graphics. And then like the character portraits are hand-drawn and look very nice. But Advance Wars is awesome if you never played those. That's like Intelligent Systems sort of other series. That, I mean, they've had these since like, they had like Famicom Wars, they had Super Famicom Wars, but Advance Wars came out sort of alongside Fire Emblem on the GBA back in the day. And those games are really good. And I've only played one, I've never played two. I'm excited for this. I think that's really cool that that is getting revived.
Yeah, I'm glad they're bringing it back. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of the art style, particularly, like, I'm just not a big fan of the sort of the 2D portraits. I feel like there are a lot of games that are coming out these days that have that, like, weird, it's like, it's not quite American Saturday morning cartoon style, it's not quite anime style, it's in some sort of, like, weird middle ground, and I'm just not a huge, there's something about that art style that, like, I'm not way into, but other than that, like, it's very cool that they're bringing Advance Wars back, because I mean this has been effectively a dead franchise for a long time. So maybe hopefully this, like, the subtitle, the Reboot Camp, is a hint that maybe they're like looking to leverage this into like new projects and not just remakes in the future, because that'd be cool.
I want to see Advance Wars get the full fucking Fire Emblem treatment, where it's 3 games in one. There's romance, there's torrid affairs. It's way too much, and then you get tired of the series eventually. You know, that kind of thing.
Yes.
All right. Last announcement of the day was about Zelda. They showed off the Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity expansion pass, which the cool thing there was you can play as one of the Guardians now. That was very fun, although you also saw one of the reasons why I never finished that game, which was the massive amount of frame rate slowdown, which makes that game almost unplayable.
My god, dude. The fucking frame rate in that trailer was the worst I've seen in a video game trailer in a long time. Like, holy shit. Like, the stuff in the trailer, sort of the content seemed cool. Link had nunchucks. That's cool. Zelda was on a motorcycle. That's cool. But I think it's partially like, you know, having every game on console with like PS5 stuff being 60 frames per second for like 6 months now. It's like, looking at that frame rate it was like shocking to me that they would put that in the trailer.
I mean, I have such a weird relationship with this game because I want to love it, and it really is some of the technical performance that holds it back for me, because I've played other Dynasty Warriors kinds of games. I've played One Piece Pirate Warriors 4. I platinumed that. I'm working through Pirate Warriors 3 because I couldn't get enough of it, and I love those games. And, like, I really do feel like that is one of those series that kind of has to be at 60, just with all the shit that's going on. But there's a bunch of these on Nintendo now that have to be at 30 because of the platform they're on. And if it's a solid 30, I can kind of live with it. But, like, Hyrule Warriors is, like, in the 20s usually, and sometimes lower than that. And it is really slow, and it's the only time on the Switch where I have played a first-party Switch game and gone, I wish this was on PS5 or something, you know? And, like, I don't know, maybe if that Switch Pro thing ever happens, this will get fixed and I can go back and play this game. But, like, phew, boy.
Yeah. I just, like... I was like, even if it would be dishonest, you guys should have done something to this trailer to make that not look so shit, because, my god, if there was, like, anything that was going to sell me on a game, it is not this trailer, because I mean, especially for something that is for a game that is DLC for a game that is already released, right? It's one thing to see bad frame rate in a gameplay trailer for a game that's still in development. Like, that happens all the time. Like, some of the early Resident Evil 8 trailers had some, like, wonky frame rate stuff in it, but that was, like, 2 years before the game came out. Like, whatever. It's a game in development. They're actually showing gameplay stuff. The frame rate's weird, whatever. This is a game that has been out for, like, a year or something. So this is just, this is just how the game runs. And that's a rough thing to put in a video game trailer.
Yep. All right, then Eiji Aonuma came out to talk Zelda. He started with reminding us about Skyward Sword HD. Nothing new, but that is coming July 16th. Zelda is also getting a limited edition Game & Watch console a la Mario, because last year was Mario's 35th. Among the different things they did was this Mario Game & Watch that had Mario 1 and 2 and a clock kind of thing, and then a Game & Watch thing. I did get that one. It's a fun little device, collectible. The Zelda one is actually quite a bit better, because it has 3 games. It's Zelda 1, 2, and the original Game Boy version of Link's Awakening, which they don't usually re-release. They always do the DX one. And then a special version of the Game & Watch game Vermin, but with Link in it. I also think the kind of green design on it is nice. That's coming November 12th. And if it's anything like the Mario one, I wouldn't worry too much about pre-ordering it, because that Mario one they made way too many of, and you can find them very easily now. So anyway, yeah, so that is coming. And then one last thing was the sequel to Breath of the Wild. It's been 2 years since they announced that. Unable to share anything new since, but development has been steadily progressing, he said, and they had some new footage for us. The new trailer showed Zelda falling down a chasm, and then Link flying down through the sky in a new costume. He had new hair. It was very cool. I like his hair. New worlds and environments up in the sky. Some stuff on the ground that looked more familiar, like the Hyrule from Breath of the Wild. But we had new powers for Link. And then seemingly a whole new world up in the sky. And then the final image was Hyrule Castle being lifted from the earth and rising into the air. Really striking, beautiful imagery. And then they said it's coming 2022.
Well, they said, to use their language, we're aiming for a 2022 release.
Yes. Nintendo is pretty cautious about this kind of thing, and I would say if they're saying 2022, probably, but I understand why they're hedging in this day and age. But yeah, that seems like what they want to do, and I thought it looked great. It looked very cool. Obviously not a lot to go on yet. We still don't even have a title. This game is up for pre-order at some places now. Do not pre-order a game that does not have a title. That's stupid. But
the headline around why of them saying, like, we do have a title for this game that's not just Breath of the Wild 2, but we don't want to tell it to anybody because it'll give away some of the stuff that happens in the game. I'm like, it's a fucking title. Like, are you not going to tell people the title until like 3 weeks after the game comes out to avoid spoilers? Like, what's your spoiler window on a fucking title for a product that you're selling? Like,
that seems like the natural extension of our fucking spoiler phobia, is that eventually we're just not even going to do titles for things. Yeah.
I bet that they have it like down to 2 titles and they can't decide between the 2. I feel like that must be why they're not saying it. Like, why would you, if you are fully committed to a title, why would you not just, like, that would be like a big moment at the end of your trailer, is to have Breath of the Wild 2 and then it gets wiped out and instead it's Legend of Zelda.
Link dies at the end.
Yes, it's Legend of Zelda. You don't play as Zelda in this one either, you guys. Sorry, don't hypothesize about that for fucking 5 years before this game comes out for, like, the 4th Zelda game in a row. Like,
yeah. I think clearly they're keeping their powder dry on this one because it's going to be the biggest thing in the world when they're ready to show it. It'll be a 2022 thing. We'll see it then. It'll be big. I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also like... What was nice is that this was like exactly what you want at the end, because the rest of the show was so good and showed so many things coming this year, within the next 6 months, that if they wanted to do their Zelda tease at the end, it didn't feel like a mean tease or anything, right? It felt very nice.
Yes, and at least it was like it had, it was brief, but it had shots of like actual gameplay stuff and not just like cutscenes in it, and that was nice. Yeah. And I think like the general direction they're showing of having the like floating island stuff, like I think that's a smart way to sort of leverage the existing assets and stuff from the first game while also not running into like the Crackdown 2 problem where you just feel like you're playing the exact same map. Like, it looks like a smart direction. I was really hoping, just because I think it would start like the greatest shit show in the history of the world. That first, like, one of the first shots in the trailer is Link, like, diving from, like, super high up in the sky. I really wish they had spun the camera around and showed a bunch of other people diving, and they revealed that Breath of the Wild 2 is The Legend of Zelda Battle Royale. And it's 100 links parachute onto an island, and it's just like Nintendo would have been like destroyed as a company. People would have like ripped their headquarters down brick by brick if that is how that trailer had gone.
Can you imagine? What if they just did that? It was just the map from Breath of the Wild 1, but now it's a big battle royale. And you can go around and you have all your powers and actually, I would play that. That actually sounds kind of fun, but you're right. People would have bought tickets to Japan to go fucking rip their headquarters down brick by brick.
Yeah, but that was because that's how my dumb brain works. Is as soon as I saw that shot, like the immediate thing that came to mind is like, this is like the beginning of a fucking Apex Legends match or something. Only your Link, and it's like, oh my god, if the camera spun around, it would just be the best worst video game trailer ever.
Yeah, they did not do that, but now I kind of wish they had. All right, that was Nintendo. They won E3 pretty easily.
Yeah, you can easily tell by our conversation, like, there's a good 5 or 6 game announcements in here of either, like, things that we haven't seen in a long time, like Shin Megami Tensei or Breath of the Wild 2, or brand new stuff, like, I mean, relatively brand new. Metroid Dread, basically brand new, even if that game has technically been in some form of production for, like, 15 years. And WarioWare. That's like, it's a good range of announcements. Most of it is coming out very soon. The trailers themselves were good, you know, barring some like kind of over narrated stuff if you played Shin Megami Tensei or Danganronpa before. But like generally speaking, it's just a well produced show, a good suite of titles. Like, I think in a normal E3, it would still be a good show, but I don't know if it would be like, this is the greatest E3 Nintendo ever. But in a shit E3, this is like, it was very nice to watch this Nintendo Direct and be like, well, someone's got their shit together. Like, video games can still be good.
Yes, it was very... The competency was refreshing.
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah. And again, they are putting out Metroid 5 on my birthday. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nintendo. That's very, very nice of you. I pre-ordered the special edition just for you. All right.
You didn't do it for Nintendo. You did it for yourself.
I did it for me. Yeah, you know. I paid $90 for this fucking Kimetsu movie. I'll pay $90 for my Metroid game. I'm stupid and I'm an easy mark. So, Sean, do you want to transition and talk about a current video game?
Yes, let's talk about Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart.
Yes, Rift Apart. You know, to recap from last week, neither of us have huge experience with Ratchet and Clank. I think you said the only one you've played is the 2016 game. Mm-hmm. I've played the 2016 game. When I bought my PS3 back in the day, I got it with Ratchet and Clank Future Tools of Destruction, which was the first PS3 game. And I did play it. I don't remember if I finished it. That was 2009. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, Ratchet and Clank is like the one that I had like never touched because, you know, like I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but I never owned a PS2. But every friend I had a PS2 because everybody on the planet had a PS2 except for me. I was like, why do I need to spend the money on a PS2? I'll get an Xbox, so I'll be the Xbox guy and I can play Halo. And if I wanted to play a PS2 game, it's your pick of any random motherfucker. You can go over to their house and play PS2. So like I've played good chunks of like Sly Cooper. I've played most of all 3 of the Jak and Daxter games, like with a friend, like sort of hot seating the controller and stuff. But I didn't know anybody that was like super into Ratchet. So yeah, like I think the 2016 game is the only time I've ever actually like physically moved Ratchet around in a video game was playing that game.
Yeah, and one of the things where I wanted to start that's so cool is that this game walks a really interesting line narratively, because this is the 9th mainline game in the series. I looked it up. There were 4 on PS2, there were 4 on PS3, there were none on PS4 except the remake, but that's not part of like the main canon. And so then there's this 9th one, and it does pick up threads from the last game, which was like 10 years ago. And I had one of our listeners even tweeted at me saying, who I know is a huge Ratchet and Clank fan, saying like, this game is like my Kingdom Hearts 3, because like they are picking up threads that I've been waiting so long for, and it was really enjoyable. And what's so cool is that you can feel that history in it. Like there's something that I think adds to the narrative stakes of this game because it is continuing sort of the Ratchet and Clank saga. It's also very newcomer friendly, even if I think you should at least play the 2016 game if you haven't played any of them, because that's like a good intro to the mechanics, if nothing else, but also the characters and the story. But like, even if this was your first one ever, it's very accessible. It recaps what it needs to, but you also feel these years of history, and that's pretty cool to leverage, because I feel like the move for most games like this would be to just kind of straight reboot it or something, or like at most do like what God of War did, which is God of War 1 through 3 happened, but they're not super relevant to God of War 4, except in the fact that, like, Kratos, he killed a lot of people, you know. But this is Ratchet and Clank 9, essentially, and that's just a cool thing, kind of, I noted in the narrative, and it honestly, it's so good, and I enjoyed the story and characters and the writing and all of that so much that it makes me kind of want to go play some of the other ones. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you. I think, like, it's clear that Insomniac really knew what they were doing with, like, how they built the game, because it kind of reminds me of, like, what Doctor Who does with the companion stuff, of being able to sort of, like, soft reset and create re-entry points for new audience members, because this game having Rivet and Kit, and them splitting the party up kind of in that way, right? So you have Rivet, who's the alternate dimension Ratchet, is with Clank for most of the game, and then Ratchet is with the alternate dimension Clank, who's Kit for most of the game when you're playing as him. And so through that, you have a new character to latch onto, either Rivet or Kit on either side, and then also you have a character that the pre-existing character can bounce off of, right? So it allows you to, from that perspective, learn more about Clank, and anything that's relevant to the plot that comes up that is something from an older game, there's a really natural way for it to be explained to the player, because you have new characters that can ask Ratchet or Clank about whatever dimension blah 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 is, or Lombax this or that is, and that character can explain it. And it is a really, really sharply written game in every way. Like, I just think, like, the story and the performances and all that is so fun, but it also just feels like a really cannily written story, understanding the way that people are going to experience it, whether you have never played a Ratchet and Clank at all, or if you have played all of them. Like, clearly the people who are way into Ratchet and Clank love this fucking game too. So yeah, I just think it's, like, really smartly written and structured in how they handled that split up.
Yeah, it's something I wanted to start with, because it's just something that, like, shows, I mean, every element of this game is so well thought out, but I really do love that they're able to do a game that effectively onboards and creates a springboard for new audiences and feels like a kind of a new beginning for the series, but while not throwing out the history. Like, I have not played all those Ratchet and Clank games, but I love that that sense of history is carried into this, because you can feel it even if you haven't played all those. Like, yes. Ratchet and Clank, just having the relationship they have and being best buds, like, it's a lot richer than it was in the 2016 game, you know, where they're starting fresh, and you can just feel that. And, like, I feel like, you know, probably the pressure to just throw out continuity is pretty high these days. And I love that they found a way to kind of square that circle. And it's one of many ways this game does that, because this game is incredible on pretty much every level. I don't think there's anything I don't like about this game.
Yeah, I think the only criticism, because I was like, yesterday, I was like, well, we're going to talk about Ratchet and Clank tomorrow. Let me think through the stuff I want to say. I was like, well, what are criticisms I could level? I think the only one is that, like, I wish the traversal in the game is so tremendously fun that I wish that there was harder platforming challenge stuff, because it's so much fun. And that's kind of how I also feel about the Spider-Man games, is like, they make these really great traversal systems, and I understand why they don't want to make platforming hard, because making platforming hard, that's a thing you can't adjust easily with difficulty settings, because you have to redesign whatever the jumping section is to make it easier. You can't just give someone different health or deal different damage. But it's like, I have so much fun running around the world, jumping off of walls, and they give you so much mobility. You can fucking break this game in a way that's very fun. You can reach places in ways that is, like, not how you're intended to. Like, you can go, there are like 2 or 3 gold bolts that I got that are, like, collectibles in the game that I got in ways that are clearly not intended, and I, like, jump off this thing and dash and ramp up this other thing and land there through, like, momentum, and it feels awesome. And then I look and, like, oh, there is a, like, wall running thing on, like, that connected to a whole other area of the map. And, like,
I had a lot of that too.
Yeah,
definitely.
Being able to do that shows, like, the richness of the mechanics and the platforming in the game. And I do wish that there was something that leveraged that in a more focused, designed way. But that's like a very minor criticism, because ultimately that just says like your mechanics are so good. And the game world does reward you in different ways by like allowing you to kind of break things and go in ways that aren't expected if you kind of master some of those the momentum and stuff like that, and being able to manipulate the wall jump and the dash together to get like distance that's more than you would normally get and stuff like that. You can leverage that to your advantage as a player, but I do wish that there was just like more just like intensive platforming stuff. And that's coming from me, the guy who doesn't usually like platforming stuff that much. But this game is so just sort of rich feeling and running around the world and navigating it, particularly when you get the hover boots, that I wish that they leveraged that stuff even more. And that's the only complaint I really have about the whole game.
Yeah, and that's a good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
That is the I love this thing so much I wish there were more of it
Yes.
problem, you know? And I kind of agree. I also think though that like I'll say one of the planets that made it for me is the planet where you get the rocket boots, which is where the archives are, and it kind of reminded me of that big area in like Uncharted 4 where the
Yes.
game just opens up and lets you go run around. And I think that kind of satiated my need for the platforming stuff. If they wanted to put more, if they wanted to do a DLC that was all platforming challenges with the movement stuff in this game, I would pay another 50 fucking bucks for that,
Yes.
because the movement in this game is so goddamn good. But yeah, like that area really like gave you enough, I think, room to move around, and it's really fun to go around. But yeah, this game is incredible. It is a overwhelming technical achievement, like top to bottom, start to finish. It just feels like magic, you know? We said this last week with our first impressions, but there's a lot of stuff this game does, and that the PS5 does, but like not that many PS5 games have done yet, because the system's only 6 months old. That just, it feels like consumer hardware shouldn't be able to do this, you know? It's incredible. It's like you're running a Pixar movie in real time, only better in some places. And then you add in just that incredible traversal stuff with just Insomniac is fucking here with the traversal stuff in games. And what I am doing right now is lifting my arm as far above my head as I can go. And everyone else is like, at best, here. You know?
Yes, for a reference
Insomniac
point for what
so good at this.
for a reference point for what Jonathan is doing when he's saying where Insomniac is, he's raising his hand so high up that even I can't see where he's raising it on the camera. And then when for the other people, they're at a level that even I can see. It is. I'm with you. That is like, and I feel that way about the combat also. Specifically, like I feel like Marvel Spider-Man's combat is very good. But Miles Morales, I'm going to bang this drum again. If you have not played Miles Morales New Game Plus on the hardest difficulty, like that game's combat, when you have all the powers and you have a whole game to play through with just like all the powers that you unlock over the first playthrough, the combat in that game is utterly sublime. Like it's incredibly good. And that feels like, you know, them making, it's not a predecessor. They were making both these games come out at the same time. But it's like both those things being in the pot at the same time makes sense of they have just developed this really accessible game design flow, right? That it's something where it's so rich to play and experience. It feels like it has a tremendous amount of depth on offer for you as a player, but it's accessible to players of any skill level. And I think that that's the thing that's super impressive to me, is that it's not like that Stranger of Paradise or whatever game, the Final Fantasy Origins game, I talked about earlier in the podcast, where I love that combat system, and I had a huge amount of fun playing the combat in that demo, but that combat is not accessible to most people. Like, you have to have played a lot of different games to be able to, like, wrap your head around that combat, because it's very systemically complicated. It's relying on your ability to analyze video game systems through the experience of you having played a lot of those kinds of games and leveraging it to your advantage and all this kind of stuff. In the same way that Neo, like, even much more so than a Dark Souls, you need to have played action games in order, I think, really to approach that game. It would be very hard to be one of your first games you've played in that genre. And neither Spider-Man nor Ratchet & Clank have that feel. They have the richness, they have the complexity of mechanics, but they're designed in such a way, both for movement and for combat, to make it so that any player can enjoy it. And even, I think, at like the standard difficulty level, I think like a very sort of novice player can still approach it, even without having to jump the difficulty down a lot. You would still be able to play the game and have fun, because it's so smartly and cleanly designed, and there's just a cleanness to the game design from top to bottom that is remarkable. Like, it's the thing that makes it feel like it is like a perfect video game, which is kind of how I would describe this. It just feels perfect in how it's crafted, how it's put together, how it's been thought of, and the execution on it on every level just feels basically flawless.
Yeah, I think mechanically it is utterly beyond reproach. I think perfect is not too strong a word to use for how all the systems interact. And that is especially fucking crazy for Ratchet and Clank, which is its whole gimmick, is that it throws at you a ton of stupid weapons that are like increasingly ridiculous, to the point where in Ratchet and Clank 2016 you get 2 weapon wheels at one point. You have 3 at least in fucking Rift Apart that you have to like map all these things onto, and they all have their own skill trees and levels and all this stuff. It's the kind of thing that should be messy and unwieldy, and instead it is elegant and fun. And I definitely felt that in the 2016 game. It's a real strength of that game. But, like, I only felt it to a point. Like, I enjoyed most of the weapons, but there were some that I thought, not that fun. And, like, I think there was some, like, especially in the way you have to, like, level those, and, like, there's no kind of arena to go test your skills in. And, like, if you wanted to get the Platinum Trophy, you had to level all the weapons up, which meant I had to play the game 2.5 times to get through all that, because you can't, there's no place to just go level up. And Rift Apart fixes all of that. And one of the most amazing things is, so I've leveled every weapon to level 5, other than the Rhino, which I just got. I like every weapon.
Yep.
And there's, like, fucking 25 of them. And I feel like they all, and, like, to the point where Spider-Man has this effect too, where in the heat of battle, if I'm having trouble, I remember, wait, what is that one thing I have? And then I'll throw that out there and be like, this is the key. And then you do it with a bunch of other stuff. But you could approach combat from so many different parameters because of the amount of shit you're given. But all of it works so elegantly and is so fun. And then is enhanced by what they're doing with the DualSense and the sound and all of that stuff. It feels minor, like a minor miracle that it all comes together. But, like, in the run of Insomniac games recently, this feels like the pinnacle,
Yeah, and specifically with this game, it does have this feeling. It kind of reminds me of, like, when we talked about Dragon Quest XI. One thing we talked about there is that one thing that's cool about Dragon Quest is that they have iterated on a similar combat model for so long that most other peers in their genre have moved away from for a long time, and Dragon Quest has, like, stuck the course. And that's what this game feels like with the shooting, that it is still at its core. It is like this PS2 style third-person shooter that was like this action platformer character shooter thing that was really common in the PS2 era, and only in the PS2 era, right? It was like a really briefly lived genre of game where you had your, like, Jak 2 and Jak 3. Sly Cooper is kind of in that genre. Like, there were, like, a million different, like, movie tie-in bullshit games. Like, it was just a, like, genre du jour of the time. Like, everybody was making a game that was like that on the PS2. And as soon as the 360 PS3 came out, you basically didn't get those games anymore because they became third-person cover shooters, right? Like, Uncharted kind of came from that tradition, but turned much more into a cover shooter, even if I think that game you don't really want to use cover that much, but it still has a little bit of that action platforming kind of feel to it. It's still much more grounded. And I think it's, very much like Gears of War came out and third-person cover shooter became this sort of like solid genre that you are a third-person cover shooter, or you are a platformer game, or you are a character action game like a Devil May Cry, but you're not in this weird middle place that those PS2 games were, that are kind of third-person shooters, they're kind of platformers, they're kind of character action games. And Ratchet and Clank has just been that. And it's, unless there was like one weird entry there, like Ratchet and Clank 6 was a fucking first-person shooter or some shit, it's been that way the whole time, right? It has been this similar model of action character platformer, third-person shooter thing the whole time, and just like doubling down on that concept and really refining it over time. And so it feels both like something that is kind of this like blast from the past of a third-person shooter that is so not about aiming, other than for the sniper rifle, which even then you don't really need to aim that much.
Not really,
like,
yeah.
And it's one of the things that like the DualSense helps with, is it gives you this like middle point where you can kind of aim without aiming by pulling in the R2 halfway to bring up the reticle, but without zooming in and slowing down your aiming speed by holding down L2 when you really want to hit something precisely. Because the game's about jumping and firing every fucking weapon you have wildly, especially I'm playing New Game Plus on the hardest difficulty, and most of my fights right now are like, I'm going to switch to my fucking grenades, which I have like 20 of, and I'm just going to throw every single grenade I have in like 2 seconds and then switch to another weapon to do as much damage as possible. And I'm jumping and dashing and doing all this crazy shit, and I'm barely trying to aim because there's a really generous auto aim, because that's what third-person shooters were like. That's what Grand Theft Auto was like. That's what every game was lock-on in the PS2 generation with third-person shooters. And this has kept with that design philosophy, while for this game, I think injecting a little bit more of a modern sensibility around locomotion that the 2016 game did not have. Having that dash and having the speed of those hover boots makes you so much more mobile and makes you much more capable in a defensive way of being able to evade enemies and having additional options to evade enemies, that I think kind of rounds out the combat options that were a little bit lacking in that previous game, where you felt, to me, too vulnerable and you didn't have a lot you could do to avoid getting hit in some scenarios. Here you feel so empowered as a player, both offensively and defensively, and it is just this rich tradition of game design that they have stuck with through 8 fucking video games, through, I mean, 9 video games if you include the remake, through 3 console generations up till now, and that dedication to that mechanic has like paid off so much, and how perfectly refined it feels here.
Absolutely. And it's this cool give and take for Insomniac, because I think something you and I probably didn't appreciate enough when we played Spider-Man and then Miles Morales is how much Ratchet and Clank is in those games.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is absolutely the like reverse thing where I'm like, oh, this kind of feels like some of the gadgets in Spider-Man. I'm like, oh wait, I'm an idiot. it's the other way around.
Exactly. And so, but it's very clear that, like, I think probably doing that Ratchet and Clank remake and refocusing some of that stuff for PS4 probably helped when it came to Spider-Man. Mm-hmm. And then very clearly having done Spider-Man helped when it came to Rift Apart, because I agree, like, I think that 2016 remake, story-wise and some of the writing stuff, I see why some of the fans don't like it, but I think mechanically it's very good. Yes. And graphically and everything. But one thing it does feel like it's missing is some of that mobility stuff. And then very clearly Rift Apart is, okay, we're the studio that made Spider-Man. We're also the studio that made Ratchet and Clank. Fucking peanut butter and jelly. Let's put this together. Yeah. And it is beautiful to put in like that kind of like modern mobility sensibility that nobody does as well as Insomniac, with that super refined battle system that nobody does like Insomniac, because nobody does it anymore, mm-hmm. right? It also, I really at some point should just go back and play Sunset Overdrive. Yes. I feel like I need to see like all the missing links here, and I know that game, the people who played it loved it. Sadly, no one played it. And that is why they now are owned by Sony. Uh-huh. But yeah, it's such a cool thing to see this like trading between, and that they're a big enough studio that they can do these like multiple franchises and kind of keep the balls in the air, while also clearly having enough of a studio identity to like this feels like the same team that did Miles Morales, you know, and I love seeing that. Yeah, it is really miraculous. And you know, so last night I finished the game, and then before bed I just brought up someone's full like PS2 playthrough of it was the second game, it was Up Your Arsenal, and I was just watching some of that and going like, it is, like, amazing. Like, a lot of just the foundational things were there, you know, mm-hmm. 20 years ago. And now they're doing it in a way that feels utterly cutting edge. Like, that's one of the cool things about Rift Apart, is that, on one hand, it is a glimpse into the future of gaming, because so much of what it's doing is bleeding edge stuff that, like, no other game has done, other than, like, Astro's Playroom, uh-huh. you know? And then, on the other hand, it is, as you're saying, refining these things that are from an era that is very much bygone, that no one makes games like that anymore. And putting those two things together it makes for such a unique game experience, you know? Like, it would be so easy for a Ratchet and Clank in 2021 to feel out of step or out of time in a bad way. And instead it feels like this is out of time in all the best ways possible, in that it is, like, from a different track of video game development, but it also feels like it is innovating and pushing towards a future that a lot of games haven't realized yet. And having all of that together is just so invigorating to see in a video game.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where them sticking to this combat model definitely like helps it feel like special because, like back in the day, like I said, you couldn't. I mean, that's back in the day when in the PS2 era, that's where like an individual publisher would literally publish over 100 video games in a year, which is like impossible to imagine now, where you can like barely hope that like Ubisoft can publish 12 fucking video games in a year. But like it was such a different era. And there were just a million games that had this general kind of combat system. Like generally you wouldn't have as many of like the really kind of ridiculous weapon stuff. Like that is kind of like Ratchet and Clank's wheelhouse. But just the like kind of run, jump, shoot, lock on, that kind of thing. It was just like every fucking video game back then.
I think especially as you said, like licensed video games, like Harry Potter did this, Simpsons did this at one point. Everybody did this.
There's probably a fucking South Park game that has like this basic kind of combat system in it. And then you have Gears of War stuff. And then at this point, I think even when those games are done well, I think most people have like a general fatigue, at least I certainly do, around the stop and pop third-person cover shooter, where it's just like, it can be done really well and I can appreciate it being done well, but it's not an attractive combat model to me anymore. It's like I've just played so many of those games. It's such a sort of like defined combat system that persisted so heavily throughout the PS3 and the PS4 generation, that like coming back to this, it now feels super fresh, like because it's so just completely the opposite side of what a third-person shooter could be from something like a stop-and-pop shooter. It is the complete opposite. Doesn't give a shit about aiming. Cover, what the fuck is that? Like, you might go behind cover for like 2 seconds, maybe. Not even that, for like a fraction of a second to avoid a rocket. But then you're jumping over it and zooming and grappling on this thing and dashing around and doing all this crazy shit. It's so frenetic and kinetic a feeling combat system. And it's just cool to see that, like, how fresh something that old stylistically can feel once you haven't played a game like it for a while. And it's like, and that those design principles have always been really good. You can just get exhausted of them over time. And it's kind of how I feel about like both. It's cool that both this game and Resident Evil 8 are like the two big PS5 games. I mean, these are like the only new video games I've played this whole year, and both of them feel like they are these like tried and true. We are sticking through like pretty like old school design philosophies that were really persistent in the earlier era of 3D games, and both of those franchises have resisted, like it's so easy to imagine this game being, we made Ratchet and Clank open world, and you climb this tower to unlock a thing, to unlock like the 5 mini platforming thing over here, and then here's like you complete these 12 arena segments scattered throughout the world to unlock the Rhino, and it's so easy to imagine the Ubisoft open world bullshit that like 90% of AAA games are now, and that being what a new Ratchet and Clank would be, and them saying, fuck that. This is a game where you go to discrete planets that are basically kind of levels that are slightly open and explorable, but are mostly just kind of like levels. And you go around and it's like 12 to 15 hours long, and that's it. And you go play New Game Plus, and we're doing our jumpy, crazy combat system. And it's like, it's a fucking Ratchet and Clank game. And they haven't tried to modernize it in any way outside of applying some of their expertise from the movement stuff in Spider-Man to this game.
Yeah, it's easy to imagine like Ratchet and Clank having gone the way of Sonic or something. Because Sonic, like, that's one of the main mistakes of Sonic, is just never figuring out any one style long enough to master it, They've mastered what they're doing here. I love what you said about like cover, what's cover. I mean, specifically this game, the dash mechanic completely gets rid of the need for cover, because what the dash mechanic does is it's in the diegesis. It's moving you like dimensionally. So like you're moving out of existence for a second, so you can be in the line of a laser and dash through it. And so it's telling you to be like very aggressive with your movements, and like you are your own cover. You can just move out of the way of it. And like that's one of those things, like when I realized that's one of those things that just unlocks so much of the combat to you, That's why I'm so glad this game has an arena mode where it's got like the bronze, silver, gold cup. I haven't finished all the gold cup challenges yet, but like that to me is the biggest thing 2016 was missing, was like a challenge mode to like really put all your skills to the test, but also like help you to learn some of those skills. And this one is done perfectly because they open it up for you pretty early, and you can do the bronze stuff, come back and do the silver stuff. Gold stuff is pretty much end game content, and so it also helps you get better at the game as you go along, and then is this thing to come back to and kind of shoot for. and they're very creative challenges. If anything, I wish there was more of that
Yes.
in that arena mode. And it's something they could... That would be a very easy way to add DLC, the way like the Batman games did back in the day. Because there's all sorts of stuff you could do with that combat, and it's so good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the arena a lot because, and I love that they don't sort of like skimp you on upgrades or whatever by doing, like, if you want to grind out upgrades in that game, you can just do it in the arena. And they're not going to like punish you for it or anything. Like, that's how I was very, very like stubborn about the Warmonger one. I think it's the gold level one, where you have to defeat 20 enemies or whatever it is, only with Warmonger.
It's silver, and I was very stubborn because 2 nights ago it took me like an hour and a half.
Yes, it's very hard, specifically because you have really low ammo, and you unlock it. If you played the game the way I did, like, I unlocked that like right when I unlocked the Warmonger. I mean, maybe didn't even have the Warmonger actually unlocked. I think I maybe bought it with bolts I got by playing that mode.
That's what I did.
Yes. And then, but you level it up by doing that. And then I had like a level 3 or 4 Warmonger. And then I went and I was like, well, I haven't gotten all the fucking crystals or whatever on whatever this planet is. Let me go there, get some of those, come back, upgrade the ammo in my Warmonger, and then go and try it again. And that felt so satisfying. Because then I just said, okay, I beat it, then turned around, went back to the main story with this like really powerful rocket launcher. And just like being able to go into the last sections of that game with what is one of the most powerful weapons, particularly against boss enemies, already leveled most of the way up. It felt very satisfying, and there was something very fun about them just saying, yeah, no, like if you want to do that, like if you just want to grind on this challenge and level up your abilities that way, like that would be probably the most efficient way. If you just wanted to level up all your weapons, just do that immediately. Just spend 30 minutes in the arena with one of like the general wave challenges and just go do that 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, the way I play these games, and I did this for 2016 because there was a trophy for it. I actually don't know if there is for Rift Apart to level everything up all the way.
I don't think there is, unless maybe there is because I would have already gotten it, but I don't think there was a pop. Because I have almost all of them. There's like 2 trophies I think I don't have yet.
Is level 5 the max for all of them? Because it was 10 in the 2016
So you
game.
unlock... you can get them up to level 10 if you do the challenge mode, which is New Game Plus. In New Game Plus, they unlock it to be able to go up to level 10. But there's definitely no trophy for getting them all to level 10.
Okay. Yeah, so... Because you did have to get them all to level 10 in 2016. So the way I wound up playing that game is I would cycle through, and once a weapon was max level, I just stopped using it, and like I even reconfigured my weapon wheels around that. And I did that with this game as well. I found that frustrating in 2016 a little bit because some weapons I just didn't enjoy using.
Yeah.
This game, I found it so invigorating because it helps with... Like, this game is already a masterclass in pacing. I want to talk about the pace of this game later. It is so well paced. It is just the perfect length. Everything about it is good. But, like, something that helped with that was if you're doing that of, like, the level cycling, then you're using, like, new sets of weapons every couple hours and, like, learning how to use them and how they interconnect. And then, you know, like, the blaster, the first one you get, I didn't use that outside of, like, the first 2 or 3 hours unless I was out of ammo on everything else. And it's such a fun way to do it, and forcing yourself to use all the weapons and learn all of them. And, like, there was one weapon that I didn't like at first, which was the Ricochet, which is the one that sends out a ball and then, like, hits them a bunch. And I didn't like the Ricochet for a while until I was forcing myself to use it and then realized all the use cases for the Ricochet and came to really like the Ricochet. There's ones, it's a constant like that. There's no weapon in this game I don't enjoy using now that I've used them all. And it's really fun to cycle through them that way. And by the end of the game, you know, I'm fighting Emperor Nefarious with... Even then, like, I wasn't, like, just using all of my good, you know, leveled up weapons. I was kind of forcing myself to use different things, and it's a really fun way to do it.
Yeah, that's how I played also. And I think, like, the game just sort of softly incentivizes you to do that because you realize very quickly, once you get a weapon up to level 5, that's like, well, if I keep on using this, I'm not leveling up one of my other weapons. And as you said before, the pace of the game is so flawless. And part of that is, like, the pace at which you unlock weapons and which weapons you unlock. Because you're kind of, you know, they're not straight upgrades, but you're unlocking similar kinds of weapons that are more effective, right? So there's like 3 pistol, basically, weapons in the game. There's the blast pistol at the beginning, there's the lightning pistol in the middle, and then there's the buzz cutter, the buzzsaw one that you unlock it in the last set of weapons. And it's like that where it's like there's multiple different close range weapons because there's like the shotgun, there's the pixelizer, there's the shield thing that is also basically like a force field shotgun. and all that. So there are multiple different weapons that occupy similar roles. Like there are multiple different weapons that lock enemies down, or they are different sort of like supports, like a turret that shoots, or here's a bunch of robots that crawl on the ground that attack enemies. And so they kind of replace each other a little bit. So you're constantly finding new weapons to use, to upgrade, but you're never feeling like you're making a choice that is making you specifically weaker. It's more you're like, okay, I have finished my journey with this weapon. Now I get to use this one. And so you're always moving on to something new, and it's always very exciting to be like, okay, now it's time to break out the Glove of Doom and see what kind of fucked up mayhem I can get to with this thing. Now I'll use the, like, Drill Hound. Now I'll use the Warmonger. You're always, like, moving on to something else and learning its advantages. And then the most fun part is when you're in a fight that is really pushing you hard and you're running out of ammo, and that's where you're like, and now I'm just, now the gloves come off. Now everything, like, you want a fucking Negatron Collider, here you go. You want a fucking rocket in your face, like, meet Mr. Fungal, and meet the Glove of Dooms, and meet the Bombardier, and now you're frozen, and you're a fucking plant. It's like the ridiculous shit that you're just throwing. So here's good. 5 grenades. Here's a shotgun in your face. Now you're a pixel man. It's just ridiculous. And those moments where you're like, okay, do you really want to fuck around? Now it's time to fuck around, and you really bring out your full arsenal. Is so much fun, and it's like that's clearly like that's like the Ratchet and Clank thing, right? Like that's what this game is like. The foundation of this franchise, this whole concept is we're giving you a bunch of ridiculous weapons that you're leveling up and playing with throughout, and then eventually you have this whole arsenal of weapons. You're up your arsenal, they might say, as one of the older, more edgy version of Ratchet and Clank that had puns in their subtitles that were risque, if you were to. That's like, it's just such a good fundamental idea for a video game mechanic that is just based in pure fucking fun with no other concerns, and it's a great time.
Oh, so yeah, absolutely. I love the moments where I'll be struggling in a fight, I'll be out of ammo, I'll be like, what do I do? And then I switch over to another weapon wheel and go, oh, right, I have the Warmonger, or eventually the Peacemaker, blast that thing out, and it just decimates things, and you're like, right, let me throw a topiary sprinkler at this motherfucker. I remember that guy. Now he's frozen with leaves all over him, and I'm gonna shoot him with the Warmonger. Oh man, it's so great. What are some of your favorite? I liked every weapon in the game.
Yes.
What are some of your favorites, though? I'm curious. I'll share some of mine too.
I loved every weapon in the game. I think probably the one that I just found the most fun to use is, I am a huge fan of the Negatron Collider. That thing is just...
Me too.
It's so satisfying, especially because it's basically the weapon you're given early on that has very little ammo and is clearly designed to be used against boss-type enemies. That's one of the ones where, like, I think even if it's, like, not mechanically, it's not, like, an amazing revelation in terms of mechanic or something, but the adaptive trigger of holding down R2 halfway and it charging up, like, whatever, that's not like a thing you could have never done another if you didn't have adaptive triggers, but it feels so good. And that's where they have the, like, Dragon Ball Z-esque, it powers up and all the fucking pebbles around you lift up because it's charged up.
Yes.
Like you're going fucking Super Saiyan. And yeah, the way that specifically, that's one of the ones where when you're in a fight that doesn't even have a boss enemy, but you're kind of getting hit and you're like, okay, it's time to end this thing, because that thing just shreds normal enemies and you just, like, cut through them with this, like, fucking giant laser beam and they evaporate. That one is probably my favorite weapon in the game.
And it makes a sound effect where it's charging that sounds like a transformer putting itself together.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Yeah, I loved using that one. My other probably favorite normal weapon to use, like damage-dealing weapon, was the lightning gun.
Yes, that one's very good.
One, the adaptive trigger is that, because that's one of the ones that does, it's kind of like that gun in Astro's Playroom you get where it, like, vibrates your finger up and down a little bit, and it's physically, the trigger, if you look at it, it's like moving the trigger is physically going up and down, it's not just a haptic. And I love that one. It's very fun to use. It's like, it's one of the ones that requires the least aiming because it just locks on, but also enemies will just you'll start seeing their skeleton and they'll start going, and it's just very funny to see. And they do it on it's such a great attention to detail because the pixelizer does this. The lightning on any of the guns has unique effects on every enemy in the game. No matter how big, no matter how small, it does it on everyone. You can use this on Emperor Nefarious in the very final fight, and he'll be going, and it's great. And I love it so much, and it makes me feel like a kid, and I adore that weapon.
Yeah, because one thing that's also great is when you get weapons to level 5, they then, all of them, their name changes, and they get like a slight modifier added to them. So which, especially, that's one of the things that makes New Game Plus so fun, is because then you're basically, when you start New Game Plus, you kind of have to like re-unlock the weapons. You have all of your weapons available, but you have to kind of buy them again to unlock them up to level 10. And that's where their level 5 through 10 stuff is not, you don't get like those clusters that give you new abilities on the weapons. It's just like modifiers that do more damage or faster fire speed, whatever all like the normal upgrades on the weapon are. But so that way it kind of repaces out the weapons again to you. So you kind of go back to the early stuff because that's the cheapest stuff in order to level up to level 10. And you start reusing some of those early weapons, but if you played the way that we played it, like you didn't use them much when they were level 5, and so you get to kind of get reacquainted to them and be like, oh, Shatter Grenade, you're a lot cooler than I remember, because that thing, when you have that leveled up all the way, like it just shreds. I mean, it literally will shred groups of enemies, because when it explodes, the level 5 upgrade then shoots little like purple shards everywhere that do more damage to things around it. And that's one where I realized once you start upgrading that, especially when you start getting it above level 5, you can get a ridiculous number of ammo. I think I maybe have 30 of those is my maximum ammo for that thing. And the other upgrade you can get for it is that it increases the fire rate, the pitching speed. And you just fucking belt those things like a motherfucker. And that might be right now my favorite weapon to use currently in New Game Plus is just melting things with these fucking purple grenades, because you just throw them so fast, and it's one of those things that it feels like you're kind of cheating or breaking the game. One other thing that I'm also doing in New Game Plus that is also very fun is you unlock these like fun extras by getting the golden bolts. One of them is RPG mode, which puts like weapon damage numbers that pop up off of enemies, which I didn't use in my first playthrough, but for New Game Plus, that is fun because you get to see a little bit more behind the scenes of like how much damage you're actually doing. And so with those grenades, you definitely see the damage rack up very quickly, and everything is exploding, and it's a very good time.
Yes, this is definitely one of those games that is made for New Game Plus. You have to play it twice. I'm going to, and I'm cleaning up. I'm getting like the final golden bolts in my initial playthrough. I'm going to finish that and then go into a New Game Plus. But like, I'm so excited to do that. I'm so excited to play with some of the different costumes that I didn't use yet, and all those gold bolt modifiers. Like I saw that you can like change. I played around with this a little bit, but decided to keep it on default for the main playthrough. But you can change like the bolts you pick up out of boxes into like rubies and soda cans and all this kind of stuff. I love that that's the kind of goofiness you don't see in games anymore. I miss it.
Yes,
it's great.
Yeah, it is. That is very much, you feel that PS2 root of like. I mean, this has like straight up a big head mode in it, which is fucking hilarious, especially because they're all cartoon characters. So their head, you realize like their heads are already huge. So when you turn on the big head thing, their heads are fucking gigantic, and it's ridiculous.
I'm so excited. I love it. Games should be fun, goddammit. Make games fun again.
Yeah, this is definitely, it's interesting playing this game because I don't have personally any nostalgia around Ratchet Clank because I didn't play these games, but I have a powerful nostalgia for this era of video games, and it's the exact same thing with Resident Evil 8/7, like was also designed this way, where it's just like you just don't see games with this kind of budget made in this style anymore, with this sense of like guided fun and like sort of this more contained, focused experience and really refined pacing and all that kind of stuff that, you know, I don't want to glamorize it too much. There was a ridiculous number of shit video games in that generation, but the really good games from that era had that kind of quality to them where they were so perfectly paced out. And it's something that is just lost on so many modern games, even ones that are really good, like a Last of Us Part 2. I love that game to death. It's one of my favorite games of last year. That game has really bad pacing, like, obviously. And it's like this era of games that just like had that quality to it when they were done well. It's really nice, and it is making me feel nostalgic. just in a
Yes.
general sense for the games I played when I was a kid.
Yeah. Well, then let's talk about the pace. Because it's really good. And actually, one of our listeners, Jamie, who's the big Ratchet and Clank fan, also, I tweeted about the game last night, and I think he's in England, so he tweeted while I was asleep about this, saying, like, back at me saying, one other thing I didn't mention is just how good the pacing is. And one of the things he mentioned is that all of, like, the mini games you do, like the stuff with Clank or Kit in, like, the other world, or the stuff with Glitch, or the rail riding sections, or any of these things, it does like 3 to 4 times, and it builds on it really clearly every time, and they're all really meaty, and then it's done. And it's like it's very clear that, like, this was not a how many times can we do this so that we can make this game 60 hours and then it's a service game and we'll add, it's none of that. It's like really focused on these mechanics and how they're going to build and iterate over time. And the way those break up the flow of the normal gameplay in these really satisfying ways is incredible. And it's like, there's so many elements to the pacing of this game. There's the overall macro, like how long is the game? And it's a perfect length. Like, I thought the 2016 game felt a little short. This one, right on the dot where it wants to be, to have a lot of meat and scope, but not overstay its welcome. Perfect on that level. Every individual level and planet you go to, how are those structured? And they're really fun. Like, the only really big marathon I did of this game was yesterday, because I felt like the way the game is paced really is great to, like, do a planet and then put the controller down, you know? Because it's great on that level. And then within planets, there's that micro pacing of, what are your movement objectives? What are the combat objectives? What sort of... they're not mini games, but you know what I mean. Like the other kinds of things you're going to do, like with Glitch or with Ratchet, or not with Ratchet, with Clank, or any of those kinds of things. And it is just a fucking masterclass in pacing every step of the way. In a similar way, I feel like Miles Morales was. Because I'm going back right now. While I've been playing this, I've also been playing some of Spider-Man Remastered and going through New Game Plus on that, which I hadn't done yet. And just remembering, as much as I love Spider-Man Remastered, that game's pacing is a lot more problematic than Insomniac's next 2 games, because I think they learned great things from that, of like, okay, we didn't need like these 5 things that are going to break it up in kind of boring ways. We can focus it a little bit more, and then you get Miles Morales and Rift Apart that are just perfect pacing.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying here with Rift Apart is that, like, it's that effect of it knows how many times to do a similar kind of scenario or mechanic, how to space those out, and when to be done with them, right? So it's every single element of the game feels perfectly paced. I mean, down to like with like the weapon wheel stuff we were talking about, it has, generally speaking, again, like weapons don't slot perfectly into this, but generally speaking, it is 3 cycles of weapons, right? Which you can kind of mark by your basic pistol. You have the blast pistol, you get your first kind of general set of weapons, then you get the lightning pistol, you get the second set of weapons, then you get at the end, you get the buzzsaw, and the last set of weapons. Those are also demarcated around the arena, right? So the arena has the first set, the bronze, the silver, the gold. Those also mark out your 3 different types of weapons. All 3 of them have different challenges around different weapons you get in that section. So it has this like 3 times around kind of structure to it, where you have your beginning, you have your middle, and then you have your end game. And the middle is like the bulk of the game, because that's really where you're going around and exploring most of the planets. And then the end game is that more like, okay, now you're kind of locked in. I mean, there's still like 2 planets you go to, but they're very focused planets. And then it's like, and then your big climax. And all that is also then focused around story beats of that opening section, is you getting the gang together, and then doing basically one planet with, you do the first planet with Ratchet, Nefarious City, then you do the planet with Rivet, then if you're just playing in the order they give it to you, you do then the second planet with Ratchet where you get the hover boots, and that to me is like the opening section of the game, because then you have all of your basic mechanics, and then you move on to that planet with Rivet where you can swap between the different areas by hitting the crystals. And so it's just like all of that, the game is perfectly divided into this kind of like beginning, middle, end structure. And then within that structure, like you're saying, it knows where, okay, it's been a while since I did one of these Clank puzzles, because there's only like 4 or 5 of them in the whole game, and you don't do them like back to back. you do something else, and then you revisit it. And so every time you come to a Clank puzzle or a rail grind section or a glitch puzzle, or a big platforming section or a combat section, it's always been broken up with something else in between there, so that you're not ever exhausted by it. Every time I came up to a console that had all the crazy fucking virus stuff on it, I'm like, oh, awesome, I get to do one of those glitch segments, and I get to do more of the little story that Glitch has in the game, and see her adventures with the virus, and play with those mechanics, and see how this one's going to be harder than the last one. And then you do it, and then you don't see another one of those for like 2 hours. It is just... It's the thing that makes it feel like a perfect video game. Like, it is just perfectly paced. It knows how much it needs. It knows how to dole it out. It knows how to link those into stories. It knows how to make every area feels distinctive and has a mechanic that defines that area. It's just like top to bottom. It is a masterclass in game design in terms of pacing and putting together a whole game that you never get bored of while you're going through it.
This is also one of the only games I can think of that is a teachable Hollywood 3-act structure. It nails that. Like, it literally, it is, and you just described how it breaks down, like, first game, middle game, end game. But, like, the story beats are also attached to that in a very Hollywood 3-act structure way, down to the thing where, you know, second act to third act shift is usually marked by finishing what you think is sort of the main goal, but then there's a twist and something goes on. So, like, you know that when you put together the Dimensionator the first time, you're not going to be done with the game, because that's how stories work, right? And what happens is Nefarious comes in, and there's this big, you know, thing that happens, and then Nefarious takes the Dimensionator, and then you start Act 3, right? And the game is perfectly doled out that way too. So the narrative, and which you and I have praised obliquely, we'll get into it in more detail in a second here, I'm sure. But like, the narrative is so in line with the pace of the game and the gameplay. It's just all very simpatico in a way. The Spider-Man games are too. Then we've praised that as well, and it's just extraordinarily impressive.
Yeah,
it really feels to me like Insomniac must be a studio that does pre-production right. Like, however you define doing it right, like, whatever amount of time they have to spend prototyping and planning and thinking all of this through before they throw 200 people at the game, it really feels like that planning stage is done very well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think it is also worth pointing out that, like, Insomniac, and we've talked about this before, but Insomniac is, like, well known within the industry as being, like, the AAA studio where people don't have to kill themselves to work at, right? So after this game came out, there were multiple different developers from Insomniac tweeting out about how, like, hey, we put this game out and it got this, like, great Metacritic score and everybody's loving it, and I worked 40-hour weeks on this game through the whole production. Like, obviously I can't speak to every single developer that works at Insomniac that worked on this game did that, but the studio has received multiple awards from GDC over the years, specifically for its business practices. And the people who work there just seem to love it so much, and I feel like that comes across in the games. Like, there is this sense of joy and sort of fun and life to the games, and then also this sense of, like, it's like their head is in the right place, right? Like, everything makes sense, everything is where it needs to be. And I feel like that's part of where you get this perfect pacing. It's like you're saying, like, you need that full proper development cycle and people who are, like, energized and happy to work on the game, and the whole project is given the life that it needs in the space that it needs for it to have that kind of creative energy and that sort of structure to it, because there's, like, not a, you know, there's not a hair out of place. The whole game just feels perfectly crafted from top to bottom, which is a particular rarity in AAA games, particularly nowadays with, like, the huge scope that they have. Because also, I bet this game was only made in about 3 years, would be my guess. Insomniac made this game specifically for the PS5, which is not the case for the Horizon sequel. That's probably not the case for the God of War sequel. That's one of the reasons why those games have PS4 versions, is that those games were not... Those games were in development for 5 to 6 years, right? Horizon Forbidden West came out in, 2016? So that game will have been in development for at least 5 to 6 years, if not longer than that, depending on when it went into development over the course of Horizon 1's development cycle. Whereas this game almost certainly had a much shorter development cycle for that, or it couldn't possibly have been designed specifically for the PS5 in mind.
Yeah, exactly. And is polished so well. And that was true of Spider-Man and Miles Morales and this. Just as polished as you're going to get from a new AAA game, you know? Just rock solid. There's been little patches, but not to like fix a glaring like, oh yeah, that part's broken, you know? Nothing like that. Nothing like that at all.
In fact, like one of the patches, I think this was just in the day one patch, but it's something if you watch the Digital Foundry coverage, you'll know. One of the patches they put out within like the day one thing basically upped the effective resolution of the ray traced reflections from 1080p to a checkerboarded 4K with like no perceivable frame rate hit, which is like
that's amazing. That's
fucking
so
magic.
Cool.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why the game looks so good, and specifically why it looks really notably better in that way than Miles Morales, because Miles Morales had the reflections were basically 1/4 the rendering resolution of the game. So in fact, if you played the 60 frames per second RT mode, it would have been less than 1080p. It would have been 1/4 of whatever 1440p-esque resolution they were using. Whereas in Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, if you're whatever mode you're playing ray tracing with, it is basically whatever your resolution is. It's an upscaled version of the resolution or a reconstructed version of it, but it is not the reflections don't look notably worse, which was very much the case in Miles Morales.
Yeah, and it still looks awesome in Miles Morales and Spider-Man. I'm playing Spider-Man Remastered right now. That ray tracing stuff is nothing to snort at. It is fucking amazing. But yes, it is noticeably a level up in Ratchet and Clank because you'll just have scenes where you're fucking. I was about to say you're fucking Clank. You're looking at Clank, and what's reflected in him is just what's going on, and your jaw drops like Clank is a mirror for the world, and it's spot on, or like Nefarious with his fucking helmet and stuff, and oh my god, it's so cool. I mean, we talked a lot about the technical side of this game last week, so we probably don't need to recap all of that, but good god, Sean, this game is a technical marvel. Just, and they play with it so much throughout, where like, and I'm so amazed that it's real gameplay systems. It's not just gimmicks. But even if it was a gimmick, the stuff of like hitting a Blizon crystal and just the entire world changes around you without a fucking hitch is ludicrously cool.
Yes, and because it's and this is kind of what we talked about last time, but it's like it's not this parlor trick where you're like, okay, well this is basically the same map, only this platform isn't here, and there's shrubbery around, and there's like a fire in this corner, right? Which is kind of like the Titanfall 2 Dishonored 2 thing, where it's like you're basically looking at the same map that has like some artistry done on top of it to make it look different, and a couple of geometric details that are different, but it's largely the same so that they can keep both of them more or less in memory at the same time.
That's a trick that goes all the way back to A Link to the Past. That's how they did that on a Super NES cartridge, is that the light world and the dark world in Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past are the same underlying code, they're just reskinned. That's basically the same logic that you take all the way forward to Titanfall 2, and then Ratchet and Clank, as you said, you're about to say, is entirely different than that.
And I do want to like say, you know, obviously that is not to like dismiss those games, because that level in Titanfall 2 is amazing. That level in Dishonored 2 is amazing. Obviously, Link to the Past is one of the best video games ever made. Like, it's a really smart way to be creative within the limitations of what those games were made with. But this game has different limitations than those games did because it's on a technically more sophisticated platform. And so it is able to take those ideas of, well, what do you do if you're shifting dimensions, or you're like very rapidly moving the player either physically or conceptually from one place to the other, that is in a completely different location. What can you do with that? And being able to realize it in this way that you've just never seen before in a game, where you say you hit that crystal, and it's not, oh, I'm on the same planet where they're like mining the ore you need for the Dimensionator, only now it's like the post-apocalyptic version. It's completely destroyed. There's one version where there is a planet, and there's one version that is basically what Alderaan looked like halfway through Star Wars, right? Like, it's like, this is fucking rubble. Like, the Millennium Falcon's gonna fly through this fucking rubble in 2 seconds, and you're jumping around with magnet boots on the floating magnet platforms, and the planet's destroyed, but like the level still has, it's like dense with geometric detail. But it just is completely different. It barely resembles it, other than like the key kind of landmark areas that you can look at and be like, oh, I guess this is kind of what that area was, only what if that area was on a planet that then blew the fuck up? What would it look like? That's the level you're playing now. And And that's just so impressive how seamless it is. Like, so seamless. And this is where you just feel Insomniac showing the fuck off. That they put that in the middle of those fucking rail grind sequences when you're like moving at really fast pace and you're hitting them and like you're still on the rail and then now you're in space and it's like, oh, fuck off. Like it's just it blows your mind. And then also the other effect that I think is just incredible, that just like it kind of breaks your brain a little bit, is the like pocket dimensions or whatever that you rip open, and it's like there's just this. It's this great Doctor Who-esque effect of where it's like there's just a level inside this level, and that the pocket dimensions look totally different, and you can walk between them, you can fly between, you can move between them as fast as you can move in the game, which when you get those hover boots is really fucking fast, and the game doesn't miss a beat. The most is you can like perceive like one frame where like the shadows basically kind of almost pop in when you're like fully settled in whichever area you're in, but you can move between them. And there's almost no perceivable anything happening. It just feels completely seamless. And it's
I know for me, I spent a lot of time just walking in between the dimensional rift and the level to just be like, how are they? This is crazy. This is just two levels stitched together that I could just walk between. What the fuck? This is crazy.
Yeah, and that's where I would highly recommend, because it's the most interesting part, the Digital Foundry Tech Talk. Where the guy who's one of the technical leads at Insomniac talks about like all the stuff they had to track, because like what's happening physically, if you want to think about it that way, in the video game is that pocket dimension exists loaded in that level in some capacity somewhere like within the level that you can't see, right? So if you imagine you could break the camera out and zoom all the way up, you would see that like 3 miles behind this mountain, this little pocket level is there. And you basically have to then take the character, and when he's moving between those two, on that threshold, move him to wherever that pocket level is geometrically, broadly speaking, within the world, and have all those like assets loaded in at that moment, have that like all there, and be able to move back and forth between them, and have like the post-processing motion blur all match up, and like the reflections of the ray tracing all match up. And so it's like you have to have fucking the ray tracing reflections on Clank trace rays that are being projected technically by a thing that is like 3 miles away, occluded by a mountain in the game world. It's like, that's some fucking crazy math, magic, engineering, technical bullshit. Like, I don't know how the fuck you do that, but goddamn is it fucking cool.
It's so cool, and it's a part of the game. This is not a case where you could like strip this out, get rid of the gimmick, and it would still be the game. The game is so built around the dimensional stuff. There are these whole chase sequences where you're like using the beetle, or you're using your rocket boots, and you're going through just like rift after rift after rift, and the game, you can just go so fast, and you cannot break this fucking thing. Mm-hmm. It is wild. And to think, Sean, this is a launch game.
Yeah.
This is what they were able to do on, as you said last week, probably for much of its development without knowing the exact final specs of the PS5. What are they or other teams going to be able to do in year 7? You know?
Yeah.
What is this console's The Last of Us? What is this console's Miles Morales as a late PS4 game or something, right? Like, what are we going to see? And it is so exciting because, like, go back to the Legend of Zelda example. What if you could make a light world, dark world game where the dark world did not have to be geometrically aligned with the light world?
Yeah.
How cool would that be? Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, very impressive version of this as well. But what if you didn't have to, like, load in? What if you didn't even have to have, like, the strict portal locations? There's so many cool things you could do with this, and it feels like this game isn't just a cool, like, tech demo glimpse into that future. It's a full game showing you what you can do as a full game. It's like, you know, we played Astro's Playroom 6 months ago, and this is one of the coolest things ever. I can't wait for the full version of this. And Rift Apart doesn't do everything Astro's Playroom was showing off, but it does so much of it, and it's so cool to get that now. We didn't have to wait for it. We got it now. How cool is that?
Yeah, because if you're looking at this relatively, like this is the exact window. It's like a little bit longer, but COVID. I mean, this was clearly designed to come out in the window that Infamous Second Son came out with,
Yes.
relatively for PS4, of that kind of spring-ish, your first 6 months, like that, like exclusive. That's technically within the launch window, but that's late enough that it doesn't have to be like kind of bad in the way that most launch games are bad, which, like, luckily the PS5 was spared that because its launch games were
Yes.
like miraculously good. Most launch games are not. Most launch games are Killzone Shadowfall, where you can see the potential of it, but I mean it's not as good as Killzone 2 or 3, because it has it has to be a fucking launch game. But Infamous Second Son is a great game. That was an awesome game. And it did show some of the stuff the PS4 off really well. Like the particles were great, the character models looked fucking awesome, way better than what you could have done on the PS3, but it's not on the same league as what Rift Apart is doing, both in terms of just a game. Rift Apart's a much better game, but also the next genness of it is so much more palpable, and I think a lot of that is both the game design, but also like the technical leap is so much more marked by clear elements like ray tracing, like the 60 frames per second, which Second Son was not. That was an unlocked frame rate that was kind of all over the place. The SSD stuff and the controller stuff, like there are such clear elements of this game that would have been utterly impossible on the previous generation, and they're all iterated on so effectively here in what is like basically the first game that Insomniac put out, right? The first exclusive game they put out on the PS5. And it's like, for them to have done this at this point, yeah, it's like, what the fuck is Spider-Man 2 going to be? Like, what the fuck are you just gonna be able to like do like the Grand Theft Auto 5 thing, where you can play as Peter and Miles, and you just like zoom out in are just Miles, but instead of it being fucking 2 minutes later like in GTA 5, it's a second later. Like, what the fuck could you do with this? It is very promising for this generation of consoles, that we got a game like this so early.
And boy, does it sell the DualSense. Like,
oh yes,
and we've said it before, even if the DualSense didn't have all the bells and whistles, it's still just a great controller to hold in the hand and use, and you and I have been playing a lot of PS4 games and games that don't use any of those bells and whistles, and it's still a great controller to use. But when you add those bells and whistles in, holy shit. Like, one thought I had a lot while playing Ratchet and Clank is, boy, the GameCube controller has been vindicated, because having those multiple stops on the
Yes.
trigger, you mentioned it earlier, but like, it really is worth saying. Like, it's something that is an immediate, obvious improvement over the 2016 game, is being able to just go half in and load, or aim, and then go full in and pull the trigger, and not have to worry about what your other hand is doing, or like manipulating one of the face buttons or something. It like, because this is such a frenetic, fast, action-focused game, being able to do both those things on one trigger opens up so much for this game. And then you add in stuff like the haptics. The haptics are nuts.
Yeah.
It's like, and it does the Astro's Playroom thing, where like every surface you're on feels a little different, and you can feel like left foot, right foot as Ratchet is moving. And when you're on a rail, it's different. It's so cool, and it really does add to that feeling of like, I'm not playing something on my consumer hardware in my living room. I feel like I went to a theme park and I'm getting a cool, curated like experience in a big box with a giant computer in the back. I love it.
Yeah. It is the tactile response of the controller is so cool. Like, it's still, we've been playing games on this thing for 6 months at this point, and not everything has used it a lot. Certainly, like, things have used the adaptive triggers a lot more than they've used the haptics. Although some things have used the haptics pretty well. Like Genshin Impact does a good job with it. But like, I've played a couple of games at this point where you're shooting stuff and you've got those adaptive triggers, like Hitman in Resident Evil 8, and now this. Or in like some demos, I played like a little bit of Warframe, just like kind of mess around with it. And it is just like, it feels like transformative to me. It just, especially as someone who like always likes that, like I like having that sort of kinesthetic response from the game. It just the degree to which they're able to differentiate all the different weapons just entirely by how it feels to pull that trigger in part way. And you know, every weapon has a little bit of different place where it stops. It has a different place with how hard it stops. It has a different element of when you pull it in all the way. Some of them give you that kickback, which is so much fun. And there's just a level of precision I feel like you're able to get with those trigger pulls that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. And I think one of the things that's cool about it is Insomniac did not go out of their way to try to do something with those triggers that is like, would have been utterly impossible to do something somewhat similar on a traditional controller setup, right? Like they're not doing something that you're that feels gimmicky in that way of here's some like super crazy thing that this gun works totally different. So like for example, it's very easy to imagine how you would do the shield gun, where if you pull in R2 halfway, a shield comes up. If you pull it all the way, you blast the gun. On another game, you just do that by holding down L2, brings the shield, and then pressing R2, then shoots it. But you're able to then, with Ratchet Clank, have this nuanced middle stage where you're not quite aiming, but you have your weapon at the ready, and that then opens up L2 to be a more like specific, deliberate choice you're making to really aim at something, and it frees up your action in the game to you have this like nuanced spectrum of different ways that you're engaging with like the shooting of the game. And I think it's just such a smart, subtle approach that they're not bending themselves over backwards to come up with gimmicky ways to use the adaptive triggers. They're just using it in the most like straightforward, effective way possible for each gun, and it's really effective.
100% agree. And you talked earlier about like accessibility. I have to imagine that if you are new to video games, this would all be so much easier because of this. Because no one has to explain it to you. You just literally feel it.
Yeah.
You know? And it's such a cool thing. Yeah, I agree 100%. It is such a cool use of this controller and such a vindication of a lot of the choices Sony has made here and how much there is to benefit from this. You know, one of the thoughts I've had about triggers is, you know, one of the things I like about my Xbox Elite controller is it's got the hair triggers. And most of the time, I just set the hair triggers to max, which just means that it's basically a tiny, tiny press to pull that trigger in. Because if you're playing a shooter or something, on most triggers, that full pull is just wasted space, you know? Like, there is no mouse for a first-person shooter where you have to push in an inch, you know?
Yeah.
That'd be really fucking weird, right? And so on most controllers, those triggers are, for most games, just kind of a lot of wasted space. And I love that what the DualSense has done is gone in and with that wasted space, added a bunch of cool things that you can do to it so that it's more immersive, or it's, I don't want to say easier, but it's like more accessible, it's more tactile, it's more kinesthetic, it gives you more feedback. Do all this stuff with space that, like, frankly wasn't being used. And that's a really cool thing to do there. The same way with, like, you know, evolving Rumble to haptics. Rumble was cool to have, but Rumble has always been essentially a gimmick, right?
Yeah.
You can play Call of Duty on your PC mouse and keyboard just fine, and it doesn't have Rumble, because the Rumble is just a nice bonus on your controller. But like Ratchet and Clank is not a game you could play keyboard and mouse with no haptics. It's very key to what the game is doing. And especially for console first-party gaming, that's what you love to see. That's the sweet spot.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing where I don't necessarily expect third parties to use particularly the haptics that much. I hope they do. I hope some games get around to using it a little bit more effectively. But I do think that the adaptive triggers like fit so logically into most games you play on a console anyways that I think you're already seeing third parties like kind of go to those pretty easily. And it's something that's like, I just really hope that what Sony has done with the DualSense becomes standard in like video game controllers going forward, that whatever the next generation is, or if there's a mid-gen leap, if like Xbox does a dual shock style, now we have analog triggers on it, or on like sticks on it, like PlayStation did with the PS1, like a controller revision. Like, this is just something that like is so clearly a massive improvement over what controllers had been, and in a way that is way more interesting than like finding a fucking cranny in the controller to stick another button or something. Like, you don't need that. I want like something that makes the experience feel richer, not necessarily something that feels very practical. It can be practical, but this is just something that has like an aesthetic quality to it in your playing of the game, that makes it more fun to play. And it's something that I feel like if I played a new game that didn't have it in it, it just feels like it's lacking now.
It's a broadening of the artistic canvas, right?
Yes.
It's something, because like more buttons and extra stuff like that is great. That's one of the reasons, like on a PC, people like playing keyboard and mouse. There's all sorts of customization and stuff you can do, right? But that's not a developer side thing. That's not an art side thing. What they're doing with the DualSense is a true art side thing, you know? Like, I love having back buttons, and I wish the DualSense had something like that. But back buttons aren't something that, like, are an art side thing to me. You know, I'll be the first to admit, as much as I like that, that's not what they're there for. They're there for my customization and convenience. That's why they're not standard on controllers yet. Maybe they should be, maybe not. But this is a real, like we said, art side kind of evolution for the game. Last thing I think to talk about with Rift Apart is the story, which is very good. We don't need to do a big breakdown and recap or anything. Not that it's not great. It's just, it kind of speaks for itself, and it is sort of a fun Saturday morning cartoon, you're along for the ride sort of thing. But the characters are so rich, particularly, as much as I love Ratchet and Clank, and Ratchet and Clank are as great as ever, it's amazing how great Rivet and Kid are. You know? Like, new characters coming into this 20-year-old franchise, and I love them to death by the end of it. That's a little miracle. It's so cool.
Yeah, and it is, like, to me, like, the heart of the game and what makes it all work. Like you said earlier, you know, it's that combination, which is so, like such an obvious thing to do, especially once they've done it, but it's, like, it's such a smart approach of splitting up the key duo between these two groups of characters. And I love also that, like, that choice is clearly driven entirely as a narrative thing. It's not a gameplay thing. It's not like Rivet can do something that Ratchet can't. They don't really bother to explain how at some point Rivet now just has rocket boots. She just does, right, because Ratchet has it and it's a video game and you want to have them, and it would be wasted space being like, and now when you're on the next planet you meet a character that also happens to just give you rocket boots, or, you know, whatever dumb thing. This is like, she just has all the guns and the upgrades and all that is just shared between the two characters. They're dimensional counterparts. It's a video game. Who cares? It's like the choice to have this split protagonist thing is not a way to have different characters with different abilities. It's just a way to, like, create this really powerful narrative space to allow you to explore this world, and these characters make the narrative way richer. And yeah, having this journey where you get to see your existing heroes through a new light, through their partnership with new characters, and then get to see that sort of, like, fateful union now of this alternate dimension, Ratchet and Clank and Rivet and Kit, and that last kind of beat of the story being about, well, now then how do these two characters become friends? How does that partnership happen? And that was where I thought, like, the story was really effective, was finding that key twist, spoilers for the game, but that key twist that Kit is the robot that basically crushed Rivet's arm. They luckily you don't get much of, like, the gory details of how there's no arm there. They're very, like, conveniently, they don't show a cutscene that, like, even kind of hints at how that happened. She just doesn't have an arm. It's very PG. Yes. Yeah. It's like, something happened. She doesn't have an arm. And that's what caused Kit to sort of realize that she was a war robot. I mean, also just, like, the idea of what if we had a Clank, but Clank actually was a war robot instead of being, like, a defect or whatever that he is in the original game. That's, like, a fun twist on the alternate dimension Clank. But that's what causes her to go out to the archives, and then these characters get reunited, and that's what causes their sort of, like, the friction that they must get over to have a sort of friendship and a partnership in the future. It's just a great concept for a story that's delivered so well with these characters you like so much, that gives you this very different look at this relationship that, even if you haven't played the Ratchet and Clank games like us, Ratchet and Clank have been so iconic and around in video games forever, you have that affection for them whether you've played the games or not, because you know who Ratchet and Clank is, and getting to have that kind of different look at them and this different idea of what those kinds of characters would be in this other dimension, it's such a well-executed idea.
Absolutely. I love Rivet. I think Jennifer Hale, I didn't know how much I missed having Jennifer Hale in video games. Not that she's gone away, just she hasn't, like, had some of those big lead performances in recent years, I feel like.
Yeah.
I love Jennifer Hale. She's so great. and I think Rivet is an incredible character creation. And then Kit is voiced by an actress named Deborah Wilson, and she is so good in this. I think this is one of my favorite robot vocal performances since Aegis in Persona 3. And that's saying something. But I think it's like a similar quality that she's doing, and it's really, really cool. And Kit just has some great moments. One of my only disappointments in this entire game, Sean, is at the end when Kit comes back, because of course Kit's going to come back and save the day, and she and Rivet are going to make up, right? And you get the big moment, and it's awesome. I thought what they were going to do was, you know how Kit is really big in her big war robot form? Yeah, I thought she was going to have Rivet jump on her back, and then you'd get to play as Kit. That's the one thing I wanted that this game didn't do, was let you play as big Kit with Rivet on her back. That would have been so fucking cool.
I had the exact same idea, because that was where I was like, are they going to have a moment where you're fighting Emperor Nefarious, and yes, and then Kit comes in, Rivet jumps on the back, and then my idea was and then in like above them drops down a title, Rivet and Kit, in like the same logo treatment of Ratchet and Clank.
Yes.
I have to imagine probably Insomniac had that idea, and they're like, this would be a lot of work to implement a whole other playable character just for this one sequence at the end. Because
for the sequel, though,
yes, for the sequel, yes, it is such a good idea to have like the flip of, instead of Clank on Ratchet's back, it's basically Ratchet on Clank's back. But yes, I had the same thought. They should do. I mean, obviously, I think they're going to make more of these. The game is very open to having more sequels and adventures with these characters, Rivet and Kit, along for the ride. That I would love for them to make a game that is just called Rivet and Kit. And Ratchet, and you then have like a little splash balloon that says, and Ratchet and Clank appear too, also featuring Ratchet and Clank.
I was thinking a great title would be Ratchet and Clank and Rivet and Kit. Would just be a great, long, stupid title they could do. But yes, I would play Rivet and Kit 100%. It's so good. And then Ratchet and Clank. I mean, these characters are always fun to have, but like, I really loved them here. I love that it's been the same two voice actors this whole time. It's not like fucking Resident Evil where Chris is a different actor in every single game, you know? It's just like, these are the voices. I think Ratchet was someone different in the very first one.
Yeah, it was the first game, it was someone else, and then starting from the second game, it's James Arnold Taylor, which I realized because he's the voice of Obi-Wan in Clone Wars. And for the whole, like, for the 2016 game and this game, I didn't look up the actors, and I was just like, I recognize this voice from somewhere, but obviously he does, like, the British accent, the same kind of accent that Ewan McGregor does, imitating the actor who originally played Ben Kenobi, whose name I'm blanking on very embarrassingly.
Alec Guinness.
Imitating Alec Guinness's accent, but it's the same kind of accent he's doing, which is different than his normal voice, sort of normal American accent, which he's doing for Ratchet. But there was a specific line in this game where Ratchet said something about, it was some sci-fi bullshit, blah, 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 camp, and the way he said it, I just had this, like, in my mind's ear, I just heard, like, the word Anakin after it. I'm like, that was Obi-Wan. Like, he said some sci-fi bullshit line as, like, a warning to someone in a kind of as condescending a tone as Ratchet could get. And I was like, that's fucking Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then I looked it up, and it's him. It's James Arnold Taylor. And yeah, he does a great job. The actor who voices Clank, and he's done Clank in all the games.
Yes, David Kaye. David Kaye as Clank is one of my favorite voices in anything ever. It is so good. Like, it's one of those English language voice performances I'd put up there with, like, great anime performances, you know? And Clank is just, even though I haven't played a ton of Ratchet and Clank games, Clank is one of my favorite video game characters. And I think there are some moments here where he gets some, like, introspection, and, like, there's his last set of puzzles where he's trying to figure out, like, where he's, like, nervous, and he's like, well, what does Ratchet do when he's doing all this crazy hero shit? And, like, I love all of that. I love that the last moment of this game is Clank doing one of his, like, his little laughs. Sean, did you know David Kaye is the guy who does the announcing on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver?
No, I did not.
How crazy. If you look at his list, I mean, he's one of those, he's a very, like, vocal chameleon. He can do tons of stuff. He's been in some Gundam anime I'm seeing here. He was Treize in Gundam Wing. But yeah, he's a great actor. I love him in this so much. Clank is so delightful. And Ratchet is the most pleasant video game protagonist in existence. He is just a nice boy, and I love him. And he's not a boring nice boy, but he's a nice boy, and it's great.
Yeah, he's just such a good good fucking guy. And it's that thing where you get to really see that through his interactions with other characters when Clank's not around. Like, I think it helps like shine more of a light on Ratchet, because I do think Clank sort of like pops a little bit more as a character because he's slightly more sort of eccentric or whatever. He's this weird little British robot that is very smart, but then also has this weird cackle he does. And Ratchet's a little bit more of the straight man, but there's just a bunch of lines that he has and like his interaction with characters. I mean, just even early on, he has that little back and forth with Miss Zircon in the alternate dimension, where she's like, oh, we're doing this secret agent espionage spy shit, and Ratchet isn't sure what the fuck's going on because he's been in this dimension for all of 2 minutes. And over the course of that conversation, you see Ratchet sort of picking up what's going on, what the situation is in this dimension with the Resistance and Emperor Nefarious and all that. And then he ends that conversation by going, well, thank you very much, Secret Agent Zircon, and walks away and makes her really happy by sort of playing into this whole spy thing. And that's so much what his character is. It's like he's such a kind character that's like looking out for other people in like very small ways, and trying to connect with them. And you see that with his relationship with Kit so much. I also love Glitch so much in that
Glitch
whole
is so cool
side. The little like I love like those first couple of missions where Glitch has like a little bit of a crush on Ratchet because he's, you know, he treats her like a person, right? Like he says like, oh, I've got my friend Glitch can help us out with this scenario. It's not, he doesn't treat her like a tool or something to solve a puzzle. She's a partner helping you on this journey also. The way that he like validates other people around him and seeks to help them, like it just, he's such a nice person to play as. And it's like the other character reminds me of in that way is it reminds me a lot of Ichiban from Yakuza 7. It's a similar quality of like, it's fun to play a video game, and like part of the fantasy of playing the game is like being able to be a kind person who's able to make a difference in the world through your kindness and your interactions with others. Like that is also very satisfying in a very different way than blowing things up. But it's like they complement each other. I get to blow up crazy robots and have fun with the explosions, and then I also get to be someone's best pal that like gives them a shoulder to lean on when they need it.
I mean, at this point, this is going to be a very weird comparison, but I think it works. Ratchet and Clank are like the video game version of Jack Aubrey and Stephen Maturin from the Patrick O'Brien novels, Master and Commander, where it's just like this buddy duo that are like in a million stories over decades, but like they're like this core that you can do so many different things with. And this game really proves that there's so much life left in that. And I think it's really cool just to see Ratchet and Clank given the same level of like, I don't want to say polish, like all of these games are polished, but just like the same level of love and care and like big attention as like Sony has been giving all their big first-party AAA games over the last like generation, where Ratchet and Clank was largely absent except for that 2016 game, and now it's sort of back in the roster with a game that is absolutely as good as any of the big Sony exclusives over the last 7 years. And I hope there's more. I really want a sequel to this. I want DLC. I want something. This is great.
Yes. Before we wrap up this conversation, while we're talking about characters, I do think we need to shout out the villains of the game, because they are also so much fun. You have your two Nefariouses, Dr. Nefarious, and it's such a good late game twist that you obviously know is going to happen eventually. You know you're going to have to meet Emperor Nefarious, but when he comes in, and he's voiced, I believe, by Robin Atkin Downs, who does voices in a bunch of stuff, but he's so good.
He's great.
He also sings the like. Well, it's him and the actor who's played Dr. Nefarious in all the games. They have their like duo they sing over the end credits. That is fucking amazing. They're it's like so villain. Good. It's basically they somehow find a way to give them like a Disney style villain song, and it's so good. Even if they could only fit it into the end credits. But like both of those performances and the conceptualizations of those characters is so strong. Of Dr. Nefarious is your classic Saturday morning cartoon villain who's like a little bit bumbling, and it's that Team Rocket-esque quality of like, I'll get you next time, you damn Lombax. It's that he always loses. He's sort of destined to lose. And this is where the game so feels like that Powerpuff Girls movie-esque, we're making the movie out of the Saturday morning cartoon, is going to the alternate universe where, and now what if the villain is like a legit threat? Like, what is the Dr. Nefarious who is the one who wins, who is a badass, like who has the massive army and who wins every time? And that conception of the character as played by Robbie Matkin Downs, and the character design, and him coming in and just fucking your shit up at the end of the second act and taking the Dimensionator and just ruining everything, splitting up all the characters again. So you have to like fight to kind of get everyone back together. It's such a good use of an antagonist, and the cartoony fun of it all is never lost. With those performances and the way the characters are played and written. It's just really great stuff.
Absolutely. One other thing to mention, the music is by Mark Mothersbaugh, and it is great. It is in like the Ratchet and Clank house style, but it is... I was listening to the soundtrack earlier today to pick our podcast theme song for this week, and it's a delight. It's you can hear it's very Mark Mothersbaugh in places. It actually reminds me of the Thor Ragnarok score in a couple of spots, but then it has that Ratchet and Clank house style, and it is very, very good. Insomniac's music in their recent games has been great, and this is no exception. So awesome.
Yes, yeah. Like, I mean, there's every element of the game is perfect. Like the sound design, the music, the voice acting, the writing, and then obviously the game
This is
design.
a Game of the Year contender. This is we will be talking about this come December, January, easily. Like, it'll be up there.
Yes, no, without a doubt. You know, again, like, I mean, it has been overall, I think, a fairly sparse the first half of the year in terms of new video game releases, but getting fucking Resident Evil 8 and this, like, I mean, both of those are Game of the Year level games to me.
Yes.
And yeah, it's been light overall for new video games, but I mean, Genshin Impact is ever going on, so I can play that video game forever.
Yes.
But
I haven't played a ton of new games this year, but like I'm looking at the ones that I've had, those two that you just named, Hitman 3,
yes, yeah,
Bowser's Fury, that came out with Super Mario 3D World, new Pokemon Snap. There's been the ones I've played I've really, really liked. So, and there's a couple that I've like bought and haven't played in full yet, like Persona 5 Strikers, that I need to go back and finish. But yeah, it's and there's some good stuff coming too. So, you know, it's shaping up.
Yes, but Ratchet and Clank, totally fucking shit. I can't wait till they make a sequel. Like it's weird to me that, you know, if you went back like to before, because I mean, I've had this game was strong on my radar ever since that first game demo, because I think that first showing of the game was so strong. But if you had gone back to like right before that moment and told me that like, oh yeah, like right after the PS5 comes out, you're going to be like hardcore into Ratchet and Clank bullshit and be playing through Ratchet and Clank, you're probably going to play that game like 3 times. I've been like, what are you talking about? I've never given a shit about this franchise. I've never really played it, never really cared about it, never paid attention to it. This game is just that good. Like, it just fucking rules.
Yep. Can't wait for Rivet and Kit Rift Further Apart,
yes,
coming 2024. Hopefully sooner than that. But in the meantime, Sean, this is only one of 2 podcasts this week, because on Thursday, June 24th, we will have another episode. It'll be in Weekly Suit Gundam and in the Weekly Stuff podcast feed. That is our Weekly Suit Gundam 2-year anniversary celebration podcast, where we're going to rank everything so far, update all our rankings, look back on the last year. We'll have some listener comments. It'll be great. We're recording that soon, so look forward to that in your feeds on Thursday.
Yes, it is. I can't believe we've been doing Weekly Suit Gundam for 2 years. Like, I can believe we've been doing Weekly Suit Gundam for 2 years. I can't believe it's only been 1 year since the last anniversary episode.
Yeah, that's the one that's kicking my ass a little bit.
Yes, but we've been hard at work updating those lists and making new lists. I know that you have been listening to a lot of Gundam music. I've been listening to a lot of Gundam music. That's the hardest list I have ever had to make, and it's only going to get harder because Gundam music continues to be good. But yes, so we'll have a whole bonanza for you with that next episode, which is kind of, I guess, a special bonus episode. We'll still be doing another episode next weekend also. So,
yep, we'll see you then.
Woohoo!